After 8 lonely years by the lake, I thought my daughter finally wanted me back. She begged me to move into her house after I sold my watch repair shop. "Dad, you shouldn't be alone anymore," she said. For 1 week, everything felt perfect. Then every Thursday night at exactly 11:30, I heard her climb into the attic. "Just feeding a stray cat," she laughed. But one night, I followed her. Through the crack in the attic door, I saw cash legal papers and a stranger whisper, "The old man has 3 weeks left." This story starts with family and ends with survival. Before we dive in, drop a quick comment for me. Have you ever had to question someone you trusted completely? Yes or no is enough. Your perspective might help someone else who needs it. Just a note, some details are fictionalized for storytelling. What matters most is the message it carries. The phone's shrill ring shattered the silence of the empty workshop I'd spent 40 years filling with the tick of 10,000 timepieces. I sat alone at the bench where I'd repaired movements for presidents and collectors, holding the $12 pocket watch my late wife Estelle had given me on our wedding day in 1978. The workshop sold 3 weeks ago for more than I'd ever imagined smelled of machine oil and aged wood. But the sound that had defined my life was gone. No watches ticked, no balance wheels oscillated, just silence and that ringing phone. Leora's voice came warm through the receiver when I answered. "I've been thinking about you." My daughter, 36 years old, a real estate agent with her mother's green eyes and a smile that used to light up my workbench when she was small. We hadn't spoken since the sale closed 3 weeks earlier. She'd texted, "Congratulations," said she was busy with listings, but now her voice carried a weight I couldn't quite identify. "Sweetheart," I said, setting down Estelle's watch with the care of a man who'd spent 50 years understanding that precision matters. "It's good to hear from you. Dad, you shouldn't be living all alone at your age. I want you to come stay with me." The words arrived so suddenly I had to replay them in my mind. Stay with her. I'd been living alone in the lakeside house for 8 years since Estelle died of the cancer that took her in 11 brutal months. Leora knew this. Had known it through every birthday, every Christmas, every Father's Day, marked by a brief phone call and a card arriving 2 days late. "I'm managing just fine here by the lake." I said, though, the truth was more complicated than fine. The house echoed. Some nights I ate dinner, standing at the counter, because sitting at the table alone felt worse than not sitting at all. "Are you sure, Dad? What if something happens and no one finds you for days?" There it was again, that tone. Concern, yes, but delivered with a real estate agent's practiced urgency, the voice that told clients they needed to decide now before the market shifted. "I appreciate the thought, honey, but I'm only 68. I'm not exactly—" "Please," she said, and her voice cracked just enough to sound genuine. "Just think about it. I have the space. You'd have your own room. We could have dinner together, be a family again." Family. The word hung in the empty workshop like dust in afternoon light. When did I become the kind of father who doubted his own daughter's love? "Let me think about it," I said, and she said she loved me. And we hung up, and I sat there holding Estelle's watch, wondering why the timing felt off. 3 weeks of silence, then this. That evening, the phone rang again. I was home by then, standing in the living room of the lakeside house where Estelle's portrait hung above the fireplace. She'd been 43 when that photo was taken, 15 years younger than I was, now frozen in time by the camera while I kept aging without her. "Dad, I talked to Jason," Leora said. Jason was her fiancé, a man I'd met twice, both times briefly. "He thinks it's a wonderful idea. We both want you here, and honestly—" She paused and I heard her breath catch. "Mom wouldn't have wanted you living like this, Dad, alone in that big house." The words landed like a balance staff through the heart of a movement, precise, devastating, perfectly placed. I looked at Estelle's portrait, her smile, her eyes that had seen me through pneumonia and bankruptcy and the death of my own father. She'd understood watches the way I did, understood that they weren't about telling time, but about preserving it, protecting these tiny mechanical miracles from entropy and neglect. "You're right," I said, and I meant it. She wouldn't have wanted this. "So you'll come?" "Yes," I said, "I'll come." After we hung up, I stood there for a long moment before calling Darren Whitfield. He'd been my estate attorney for 30 years, and my friend for longer, 52 years old, now steady as a Swiss lever escapement, the kind of man who returned calls within the hour. "But Harold," he said when he picked up, "what's going on?" "I'm moving into Leora's place," I told him. Want you to hold my watch collection in the trust, just to keep precious things secure, you understand. 23 vintage Swiss watches. I'd spent 40 years acquiring them, a 1952 Patek Philippe perpetual calendar worth $180,000, a Jaeger-LeCoultre Reverso at $85, an Omega Speedmaster at $45. The entire collection appraised at $400,000, and I'd loved every piece the way some men loved cars or art. Makes perfect sense, Harold, Darren said without hesitation. Bring them by tomorrow morning. Thank you, I said, and I meant that too. For 40 years, I'd protected the work of dead craftsmen, Swiss masters, who'd poured their precision into movements that outlived them by generations. Maybe it was time someone took care of me. That night before bed, I stood in front of Estelle's portrait one last time. Do you think I should go? I asked her the way I'd asked her 1,000 questions when she was alive, the way I still ask them now, even though no answer ever came. Her smile looked back at me, the same smile she'd given me on our wedding day, the same one she'd worn when she bought me that $12 watch, because we couldn't afford the Omega I'd wanted. For a man who knows the value of time, she'd had engraved on the back. Not a man who knows the price, the value. I turned off the light and walked to the bedroom thinking, yes, this is the right decision. My daughter wanted me close. After 8 years of eating dinner, standing up after 8 years of talking to photographs, someone finally wanted me in their home. I didn't know, couldn't have known, that the invitation was the final phase of a trap that had been closing around me for 18 months. I didn't know that, by tomorrow evening, I'd be sleeping in a house where the morning coffee was already planned to contain just enough lorazepam to cloud my judgment, but not enough to make me suspicious. I just knew I was tired of being alone. I moved into Leora's Shelburne house on a Saturday in mid-July, carrying a single suitcase and the certainty that I'd made the right choice. The guest room overlooked a small garden where tomatoes grew in careful rows, and the reading chair by the window caught the morning light exactly as she'd promised. For the first time in 8 years, I woke to the smell of someone else's cooking. Pancakes. Leora stood at the stove Sunday morning, making them the way I'd taught her when she was 9, slightly underdone in the center, because that's how we both liked them. She'd set out real Vermont maple syrup, and the coffee was brewing strong and dark. "Dad, this room gets the best morning light," she said, bringing breakfast on a tray. "I set up the reading chair by the window for you." I ate in that chair and watched morning break over the garden, and thought, this is what I've been missing. Not just food or company, but someone who remembered the small details of who I was. The first week unfolded like a watch movement, assembled by a master, every component in perfect alignment. Leora made pot roast Monday, using Estelle's exact recipe. She asked if my room was warm enough, opened windows in the morning, so I could hear birds close them at noon when the sun got hot. On Tuesday, the neighbor knocked. Lorraine Archer was 71, with silver hair and eyes that looked like they'd witnessed too many sleepless nights to be easily fooled. She lived next door, and behind her on the porch steps stood a teenage girl with dark hair and her grandmother's same direct gaze. "Vivian," she said. Her granddaughter visiting for the summer. She brought a warm apple pie that smelled like cinnamon and late summer. "Welcome to the neighborhood, Mr. Ramsey," she said, studying me with an intensity that made me stand straighter. "Your daughter talks about you constantly, says you're a master craftsman." "Watchmaker," I said, taking the pie. "Retired now." "Still," Lorraine said, glancing past me into the house where Leora was setting the table. "Your daughter's very devoted." There was something in the way she said, devoted a slight hesitation maybe, or just the wariness of someone who'd learned that surfaces don't always match what's underneath. But the pie was excellent, and I filed the observation away like a watchmaker, cataloging tiny irregularities that don't yet constitute a problem. By the end of that first week, I was happier than I'd been since Estelle died. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be in a house that didn't echo, to eat meals at a table instead of standing at the counter, to hear another person breathing in adjacent rooms. Maybe I'd waited 8 years for this, not just any home, but coming home to someone who remembered how I took my coffee. On the 7th night, I woke at 11 to use the bathroom. The house was dark except for the nightlight Leora had installed near my door, and I was halfway down the hall when I saw her. She stood at the attic stairs, carrying a small plastic container, climbing carefully in the darkness. She didn't see me. I stood frozen by my bedroom door and watched her disappear into the attic, heard the creak of floorboards overhead, then silence. 3 minutes later, she came back down without the container, closed the attic door softly, and returned to her bedroom. I used the bathroom and went back to bed, but sleep came slowly. At breakfast the next morning, I kept my voice casual. "Sweetheart, I saw you going up to the attic pretty late last night. Everything all right?" She laughed, bright unguarded, the laugh she'd had as a child. "Oh, just feeding a stray cat, Dad. Ragged old thing keeps sneaking in through the roof vent. I leave food so it doesn't starve." A cat. I spread butter on my toast with careful precision. "In the attic?" "Don't worry, it's not causing damage, just hungry. I'll call someone to seal the vent once it stops coming around." It made sense. Strays were common in Vermont. Attics had gaps people fed animals. But the watchmaker in me, the part that had spent 50 years identifying problems by tiny mechanical inconsistencies, felt something catch. That afternoon, while Leora was at the grocery store, I climbed the attic stairs. The space was dusty and close, smelling of old wood and insulation. Cardboard boxes lined the walls, labeled in Leora's neat handwriting, "Christmas Books College." The single window at the far end let in weak afternoon light that showed every particle suspended in still air. I walked slowly, studying the floor. A cat living here would leave traces, paw prints in the dust, fur caught on rough wood, the animal smell I'd known from barn cats at my workshop for years. There was nothing. No prints, no fur, no scent except the faint mouse smell of old cardboard and forgotten fabric. Why would anyone lie about feeding a cat? Then I saw it, a clean rectangle in the dust near the far wall, about 2 feet by 1 foot, where something had recently been placed and removed. The outline was sharp and undisturbed. No cat paws had walked through it. The dust around the rectangle was thick, the kind that accumulates over months. I stood there looking at that rectangle for a long time. A cat that left no prints, a clean space in undisturbed dust, a daughter who'd gone 8 years barely calling, who suddenly wanted me close, who made pancakes exactly the way I liked them, and climbed stairs at 11 at night, carrying containers to feed animals that didn't exist. I walked back downstairs, sat in my armchair by the window, and picked up the newspaper. I read the same paragraph 3 times without absorbing a single word. Outside, Leora's car pulled into the driveway. I heard her cheerful voice calling that she'd bought ingredients for pot roast tomorrow. I called back that it sounded wonderful, and part of me meant it, because part of me still wanted everything to be exactly what it appeared to be. But the watchmaker in me, the part that had spent a lifetime observing mechanical patterns, identifying the moment when precision gave way to failure, had just noticed the first broken gear. I didn't confront Leora about the cat. Instead, I watched. For a week, I became the observer. I had been trained to be studying mechanisms for inconsistencies, knowing that patterns revealed more than single incidents. I noted when she left the house, when she received phone calls, when she climbed those attic stairs. Thursday nights, always Thursday nights. The footsteps on the attic stairs came at exactly 11:30 p.m., just as they had the previous Thursday. I was lying in bed with the lights off when I heard them, the third step that creaked, the fourth, that groaned, the soft click of the attic door opening. My bedside clock read 11:30 precisely, the same time as last week. Patterns never lie. I waited 60 seconds, then slipped out of bed and moved to the hallway in my socks. The attic door stood open 6 inches. Light seeped through the gap. I crept to the stairwell and pressed against the wall, peering through the crack. Leora stood in the attic beside a man I'd never seen. He was maybe 42, wearing an expensive dark suit, his face all angles, sharp cheekbones, thin lips, eyes that reflected light, like polished steel, rather than absorbing it the way human eyes should. Between them on the floor, stacks of cash bound with paper bands, manila folders stamped with bank logos, and a laptop displaying spreadsheets. The man's voice was clinical and flat, stripped of warmth. "We only have 3 weeks left. The old man has to sign." The old man? Me? "What if he doesn't?" Leora asked, and her voice carried none of the warmth she used when speaking to me. This was her real voice, anxious, calculating. "We'll make sure he does." The way he said it, casual, certain, like discussing whether to add salt to soup, sent ice water through my veins. Not the fear of death, though. That was part of it. The horror came from understanding that I was correctly interpreting what I'd just heard. My daughter and this cold-eyed man were planning something that required my signature, and they had 3 weeks to obtain it, and if I didn't comply, something would happen to ensure I did. I retreated to my bedroom with a watchmaker's careful silence, closing the door without letting the latch click. 3 weeks, sign. We'll make sure he does. I stood in darkness with my heart hammering until I heard them descend Leora to her bedroom, the man out the back door. An engine started, tires on gravel, gone. At 5 in the morning, I gave up on sleep. I retrieved the old leather journal I'd kept for 40 years, the one where I'd documented complicated repairs, recorded unusual movements, sketched solutions to mechanical problems. The pages were filled with my personal shorthand symbols I'd developed over decades, a curved line for escapement, a dot and circle for jewel bearing a triple slash for worn gear teeth. I opened to a blank page and began documenting everything I'd heard and seen. 11:30 p.m., man 42, dark suit, cash estimated $40,000 plus, bank folders, laptop, 3 weeks, sign. We'll make sure. I wrote it all in Watchmaker's shorthand specialized notation that looked like technical drawings to anyone else, but told me a complete story. 40 years of fixing watches had taught me when to remove a single gear immediately, and when to step back and study the whole mechanism first to understand what was truly broken. This mechanism was complex. I needed to understand all its gears before attempting repair. At 6 a.m., I calculated my options. Call police immediately. Report that my daughter and an unknown man were meeting secretly with cash, discussing forcing me to sign something I was a 68-year-old man living with his daughter for 2 weeks. They'd ask what document. I didn't know. They'd ask for evidence. I had none except midnight eavesdropping, easily dismissed as confusion and jealousy or early dementia. Pack and leave. Return to the lake house distance myself from whatever this was, that left them free to find another victim, another old man with assets and a vulnerable family member. I couldn't live with that. Stay. Gather evidence. Document everything. Build a case that couldn't be dismissed as paranoid delusions. I picked up the phone and called Darren. He answered on the third ring, voice thick with sleep. Harold? It's 6 in the morning. I need to see you. I said quietly, though. Leora's bedroom was at the far end of the hall. Urgently, and I need absolute ironclad discretion. The sleep vanished from his voice. What's wrong? Not on the phone. Can you meet me at your office? I'll be there by 7. I dressed in the dark, moving with the careful precision of a man who'd spent his life working with components that could shatter if mishandled. Before leaving, I looked back at the journal, filled with watchmaker symbols. Anyone glancing at it would see nothing but technical notes of an old craftsman documenting gear ratios and escapement angles. I closed it and slipped it into my coat pocket. This would be the only thing I'd bring to Darren's office because no one else alive could read it. 40 years of specialized notation, the private language I'd developed for solving mechanical mysteries, had become the one record of a conspiracy that couldn't be intercepted or understood by anyone except me. I left the house at 6:45, walking to my car in gray pre-dawn light, while Leora slept unaware that the old man she planned to force into signing something had just begun building the case that would unravel everything she and her cold-eyed partner had constructed. Darren's law office opened at 7 on the dot. I was waiting in the parking lot when he arrived. He led me to a private consultation room and pulled the blinds tight before I even sat down. I placed the leather journal on his desk, 40 years of watchmaker's shorthand symbols covering the page I'd written that morning. Darren looked up from the journal and asked the question that would change everything. Harold, can you prove any of this in court? That's why I'm here. I laid out everything. The cat food box that led to an empty attic, the Thursday night pattern, the cold-eyed man I'd seen standing over cash and bank documents with my daughter, the phrase that kept echoing in my head, the old man has to sign. Darren listened without interruption, his fingers steepled under his chin the way they had been for 30 years of legal consultations. When I finished, he sat back in his chair. What you're describing, if verified, is severe elder financial fraud, he said. Possibly conspiracy to commit financial coercion, but we need hard proof. Your word alone won't cut it in court. They'll say you misheard, misunderstood, that you're confused. That happens to elderly witnesses more than you'd think. I'm not confused. I know that, but a defense attorney will make a jury believe you are. We need recordings, audio evidence that can't be dismissed. I thought about that for a moment. I need to hear what they say when they think no one is listening, but I can't keep lurking on stairs every night waiting for them to meet. I'm 68 years old. Eventually they'll notice. Commercial surveillance equipment, Darren said, pulling a notepad toward him. There are companies that specialize in... No, I held up my hand. Commercial bugs are large, detectable. If this man is as careful as he seems, he'll sweep for devices. Standard equipment would be found in an hour. I looked down at my hands. The same hands that had assembled balance wheels, smaller than rice grains, that had manipulated hairsprings so delicate they'd break under the weight of a breath. "Let me build them myself," I said. "Smaller than any commercial bugs on the market. They will never find them." Darren studied me across the desk. "Can you actually do that?" I spent 40 years building microscopic mechanisms that keep perfect time under extreme conditions. Yes, I can build 3 audio transmitters small enough to hide in plain sight. For the first time in 40 years, I wasn't repairing timepieces for strangers. I was building the countdown mechanism for my own survival. That night, July 31st, I told Leora I was tired and retired to my room at 8 p.m. She kissed my forehead and said to sleep well. I waited until her bedroom light went dark at 10:30, then sat at the small desk by my window and went to work. The components were simple to acquire. I'd made a trip to 3 different electronics stores that afternoon, while Leora was showing houses buying small quantities at each location, so no single purchase would be memorable. Micro-transmitters the size of shirt buttons, lithium batteries thin as watch crystals, wire finer than human hair. My watchmaking tools were still in their velvet-lined case at the bottom of my suitcase loops, tweezers, precision screwdrivers. I'd carried them to Leora's house more from habit than intention, the way a surgeon might pack a scalpel, even on vacation. I assembled the first bug under the desk lamp, magnifying loop strapped to my head, tweezers moving with the precision I'd developed over 5 decades. The whole device was smaller than a dime when finished. Battery life, 72 hours of continuous recording before needing replacement. Range 100 feet to the receiver I'd built into an old hearing aid case. 40 years of this, I whispered to myself in the dark room. Gears smaller than a grain of rice. No tremor, not now. My hands didn't shake. They never had. By 2 in the morning, on August 1st, I had 3 functional bugs. I tested each one, confirming transmission clarity, then hid them in my dresser drawer, and went to bed for 3 hours of sleep that didn't come. The next day, a Wednesday, Leora left at 9 a.m. for work. I waited 15 minutes, then began installation. Bug number 1 went inside a wooden decorative sculpture on the living room bookshelf, tucked into a hollow I'd carved the night before, using tools from the garage. The wood sealed perfectly. Undetectable. Bug number 2 fit within the brass casing of the pendulum clock in the hallway. I opened the mechanism housing, as if performing routine maintenance, nested the device behind the escapement wheel, and closed it back up. Anyone inspecting the clock would see only the original 19th century movement. Bug number 3. I placed behind the kitchen mirror using a dab of adhesive putty to secure it to the wall in the 2-inch gap between mirror and plaster. You'd have to remove the entire mirror to find it. By noon, the house was wired. By 3 p.m., when Leora returned home, I was sitting in my armchair reading the newspaper like nothing had changed. That evening at dinner, I wore the micro earpiece. It was flesh-colored, smaller than a hearing aid, nestled in my right ear, where my gray hair hid it completely. I'd synced it to Bug. Number 1, the living room sculpture, sat on the bookshelf 6 feet from where Leora and I ate at the dining table. She'd made pot roast again, the way Estelle used to make it. I cut my meat into small pieces and chewed slowly while her voice came through the earpiece, in real time, a fraction of a second delayed from the sound traveling through open air. "Eat up, Dad, I made plenty." The voice in my ear said, "Eat up, Dad, I made plenty." I smiled at her across the table. "It's wonderful, sweetheart." She smiled back, reaching over to pat my hand. "I'm so glad you're here." I was hearing every breath in this house with perfect digital clarity, and she had absolutely no idea. The dinner test had proved the system worked. Now I needed to know what it would capture when they thought I was asleep. I lay in darkness at 10 p.m., with the earpiece nested in my right ear, the miniature receiver tucked under my pillow, connected to all 3 bugs. The room was silent except for the distant hum of the refrigerator downstairs and my own breathing. Through the earpiece, nothing. The motion-activated sensors remained dormant, waiting. I stared at the ceiling and waited with the patience I'd learned from 40 years of watching balance wheels oscillate at 18,000 beats per hour. At exactly 11 p.m., bug number 1 clicked open in my ear. The motion sensor had detected movement in the living room. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate. Leora's footsteps. I'd learned the rhythm of them over 3 weeks, the creak of the couch as she sat down. A pause, then the electronic chirp of a phone being dialed. She was calling someone. "It's me," she said, her voice low but crystal clear through the device I'd built. A male voice responded through her phone's speaker, distant but audible. Desmond. The same clinical flat tone I'd heard in the attic. "Status report," he said. "He doesn't suspect a thing," Leora whispered. "Everything is moving exactly as scheduled." I lay motionless in the darkness, my hand gripping the receiver under the pillow, so tightly my knuckles ached. The device was recording. Every word. Permanent. Admissible. "Are you certain?" Desmond asked. "I need absolute certainty. We cannot afford mistakes at this stage." "Positive." He's thrilled. Like a child who's finally come home. Like a child who's finally come home. The phrase hung in the air between the living room below and my bedroom above, traveling through circuitry I'd soldered, with my own hands delivered directly into my ear with perfect digital clarity. She wasn't wrong. I had been thrilled. For those first 7 days before I found the rectangle in the attic dust, before I watched them count money at midnight, I'd been genuinely completely happy. The pancakes, the pot roast, the way she'd set up the reading chair by the window where the morning light came through just right. "Thank you for giving me those 7 days, sweetheart. Thank you for the illusion. It was the best gift you could have given me before you tried to destroy me." "The timeline remains intact," Desmond was asking. "Yes, he's comfortable here. He trusts me. When the time comes, he'll sign." "When the time comes, he'll sign." Still no mention of what document, what deadline. But they were confident. They believed I was exactly where they wanted me, docile, grateful, oblivious. "Good," Desmond said. "Continue the pattern. No deviations. I'll be there Thursday night as usual to review the accounts." "Understood." And Leora. "Yes. Remember what's at stake, for both of us." A pause. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, afraid. "I remember." The call ended. Through the earpiece I heard her stand, heard her footsteps cross the living room and climb the stairs. The hallway. Her bedroom door closing. Bug number 1, clicked off motion sensor, detecting no further movement. I lay there in the darkness for a long time, the receiver still clutched under my pillow. She'd studied me. That was the part that cut deepest. This wasn't opportunistic crime, it was surgical. She'd identified my weakness the way a predator identifies the slowest member of the herd. 8 years of loneliness. 8 years of eating dinner, standing at the kitchen counter. 8 years of talking to Estelle's photograph because there was no one else to talk to. And she'd weaponized it. The pancakes weren't kindness. The morning light through the window wasn't thoughtfulness. They were bait carefully calibrated to my exact specifications, designed to make me feel like I'd finally come home, so I wouldn't notice when they started taking everything I had. 40 years of watchmaking teach you one thing above all else: the most patient man always wins. You cannot rush precision. You cannot force gears into alignment. You observe. You measure. You wait for the exact moment when every component is positioned correctly, and then you act with absolute certainty. I was not ready to act, but I was ready to continue observing. At 11:14 p.m., I turned on my bedside lamp and retrieved the leather journal from the drawer. I opened it to a fresh page and began writing in the shorthand symbols only I could decipher. August 2nd, 11 p.m., bug. Number 1, operational. L to D, phone call. Quote, "He doesn't suspect a thing. Everything is moving exactly as scheduled." D confirms Thursday night pattern. L confirms timeline intact, will sign when time comes. Recording captured filed as audio_001. I drew a small circle at the bottom of the page, the symbol I used in my workshop, to indicate a job was proceeding according to plan, that all measurements had been verified, and the next phase could begin. Below it, I wrote 3 words in shorthand: system operational. Countdown begins. I closed the journal and turned off the lamp. The earpiece was still in my ear. I left it there. If bug number 2 or 3 activated during the night, I wanted to hear it. I needed to hear everything now. I turned off the receiver and lay perfectly still in the darkness. Outside the Vermont, August air was still warm. Somewhere in Burlington, 23 vintage watches sat in a climate-controlled vault at Darren's office, untouchable. In my dresser drawer, a journal filled with symbols that looked like technical notes, but documented a conspiracy. In 3 rooms of this house, devices smaller than dimes that captured every word spoken when no one thought anyone was listening. And most importantly, I had time. Not unlimited time. They had a schedule, a timeline they kept referencing but hadn't specified. But I had enough time to be patient, enough time to observe, enough time to wait until I understood not just what they were planning, but how to dismantle it completely. I'd spent 50 years repairing the work of dead craftsmen, preserving mechanical precision against entropy. Now I would use those same skills to preserve myself. The child who'd finally come home was going to show them exactly what a watchmaker could do when you tried to steal his time. I spent that night planning. By morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The attic held more than midnight meetings and non-existent cats. If they were running a scheme sophisticated enough to coordinate Thursday night schedules and require my signature, there would be physical documentation. Criminals always kept records. I'd learned that from 50 years of watching people document transactions they believed would never be scrutinized. On August 3rd at 9:30 a.m., while Leora was at work showing properties, I climbed the attic stairs with my watchmaking picks in hand. The lockbox opened in 3 minutes and 42 seconds. My watchmaking picks left no scratches on the brass mechanism. I'd found it beneath loose floorboards near the far wall, exactly where the clean rectangle in the dust had been 3 weeks earlier. Gray metal combination lock that yielded to the techniques I'd developed for opening complicated watch cases without damaging them. 50 years of precision had not left me. Inside the complete architecture of my destruction, a petition for emergency guardianship, finalized and notarized, diagnosing me with early-stage cognitive decline and progressive memory impairment. The language was clinical and convincing, alleged incidents of confusion, wandering inability to manage finances. All fabricated, all documented as if witnessed by concerned family members. Forged medical assessments bearing Dr. Harvey Finch's signature, my family physician, for 23 years. The handwriting looked perfect. The medical letterhead looked authentic. But I'd never had those appointments, never exhibited those symptoms. A pre-drafted contract to sell my lakeside home for $650,000, about $100,000 below market value for a quick sale. The buyer was listed as Clearwater Property Holdings, LLC. I'd bet my watch collection that if I traced ownership, it would lead back to Desmond or one of his associates. Admission papers for Sunset Ridge. Assisted living dated and ready for my signature with a highlighted section, indicating I would be surrendering financial control to my designated guardian upon admission. And on top of everything, a small yellow post-it note in handwritten ink, transfer date, October 14th, 2023. October 14th, 72 days from today. 72 days to dismantle everything they had built. October 14th, 80 days left. And 80 days is an eternity if you know exactly how to use it. I pulled out my phone and photographed every single page. 23 photographs, total high resolution, clear enough to read every word. The guardianship petition, the forged medical reports, the property sale contract, the admission papers, the post-it note with its deadline written in someone's careful script. Then I placed everything back exactly as I'd found it, closed the lockbox, reset the combination, and returned it to the space beneath the floorboards. The loose boards went back into position. The dust around them remained undisturbed. I walked downstairs at 10:14 a.m. and sat in my reading chair by the window, picking up the newspaper I'd left there an hour earlier. At 10:16, Leora's car pulled into the driveway. I was reading the sports section, or appearing to, when she walked through the front door carrying a leather portfolio. "Oh, you're home early," I said, looking up with the exact expression of pleasant surprise I'd practiced in the mirror that morning. "What are we having for dinner, sweetheart?" "Just needed to grab some files," she said, barely glancing at me as she headed toward her home office. "Chicken tonight sound good, Dad." "Sounds wonderful." She disappeared into her office. I heard drawers opening, papers rustling. 5 minutes later, she was gone again. The front door closing, her car backing out of the driveway. I sat there with the newspaper and thought about October 14th and how many things could happen in 80 days. The next afternoon, August 4th, Leora came home early again. I was in the living room when I heard her car. She walked through the front door without her usual greeting, went straight past me and climbed the attic stairs. Her footsteps overhead were deliberate, purposeful. 5 minutes of absolute silence followed. When she came back down, her footsteps were noticeably heavier. She walked into the kitchen without looking at the living room where I sat. Through the wall, I heard water running, a sharp exhale. I reached up and adjusted the earpiece in my right ear, confirming it was synced to bug number 3. The sound came through crystal clear, Leora dialing her phone. 1 ring, 2. Desmond answered. "What?" "Someone opened the box," Leora said, her voice tight. "The files were shifted." A pause. When Desmond spoke again, his clinical tone had frozen into something harder. Are you sure? Yes, I always placed the guardianship petition on top, with the corner aligned to the left edge of the box. It was centered, and the post-it note was on the admission papers I'd put it on the property contract. Another pause, longer this time. Are any documents missing? Desmond asked. No, everything's still there. But someone definitely looked. The old man? I don't know who else it could be. But why would he go through my things? And if he saw what was in there, why hasn't he said anything? Oindowadenspins. You want to watch me, sweetheart? Fascinating. I've been watching you for 3 days straight. Maybe he didn't understand what he was looking at, Desmond said. You said he's been docile, trusting. He has been. Yesterday he asked about dinner like nothing was wrong. Then keep the plan, but watch him closer. If he's becoming suspicious, we may need to accelerate the timeline. Understood. The call ended. Through bug number 3, I heard Leora set her phone on the counter. Another sharp exhale, then footsteps. She was leaving the kitchen. I was sitting on my bed in my room listening to every word when she walked past my door toward her bedroom. I heard her door close. I took out my earpiece and looked at it, smaller than a hearing aid, flesh-colored and visible to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for it. 3 bugs hidden in this house. 23 photographs on my phone showing the complete conspiracy. A leather journal filled with watchmaker's shorthand documenting every conversation I'd overheard. She knew someone had breached the lockbox. She was watching me closer now. Desmond was considering accelerating their timeline, but she still had no idea about the photographs. She had no idea about the bugs in 3 rooms. She had no idea I'd just heard every word of her panic call to Desmond, that I'd been listening when she reported the intrusion when he ordered her to watch me closer. I lay back on my bed and allowed myself a faint smile. I was always one move ahead, and I intended to stay that way. They were watching me closer. I needed to be more careful. The morning after Leora's panic call, she brought me coffee in the kitchen, something she'd never done before. She carried the mug directly to where I sat, set it down, and stood there watching. The coffee smelled wrong, not burnt or stale, but wrong in a way only 40 years of identifying microscopic chemical traces could detect. I'd spent 5 decades distinguishing between grades of machine oil, identifying solvents by scent, when a watch case had been improperly cleaned. My olfactory sense had been trained to detect anomalies measured in parts per million. Beneath the dark roast aroma, I caught something faint and medicinal, slightly sweet, synthetic. It didn't belong. How are you feeling this morning, Dad? Leora asked, standing closer than usual. I lifted the mug, let the steam rise. Her eyes tracked the movement with intensity I'd never seen before. Not concern, surveillance. Wonderful, sweetie, I said, setting it down without drinking. Too hot, I'll let it cool. Something flickered across her face, disappointment, frustration, but she smoothed it away. I'm heading out early, 3 showings before noon. Good luck, I said, picking up the newspaper. She lingered 5 more seconds, then left. I heard her car pull away. The moment her engine faded, I retrieved the small glass vial from my sock drawer, the type I'd used for storing cleaning fluids in my workshop. I returned to the kitchen and extracted precisely 10 milliliters using an eyedropper, enough for comprehensive analysis. I capped the vial, labeled it August 5th, 2023, 7:05 a.m., and secured it in my coat pocket. Then I poured the remaining coffee down the drain, rinsed the mug, and placed it in the dishwasher. My daughter wasn't just lying to me. She was poisoning me one breakfast at a time. At 10 a.m., I called Darren from my bedroom. I need a toxicology analysis, I said. Confidential, comprehensive. I have a sample. What kind of sample? Coffee from this morning. I believe it's been adulterated. A pause. Harold, are you saying? Yes. I need to know how much and how long it would take to kill me at this dosage. I'll have a courier pick it up within the hour. 3 days for results. I hung up and stared at the vial. 40 years working with substances that could destroy a watch movement if misapplied by a single drop. Now, I held my own poisoning in a glass tube. The night of August 6th, I lay in bed at 11 p.m. with the earpiece synced to bug number 1. The living room sensor activated. Leora's footsteps, the couch creaking, phone dialing. He got into the box, Leora said, her voice trembling. We have to move the date up. How much time do we cut? Desmond asked. A week, before August 20th. My chest tightened. August 20th, 14 days from now, not October 14th. They'd just collapse my 72-day buffer into 22 days. Yeah, fine, Desmond said. But we double the dosage. 12 seconds of silence followed. I counted them. 12 seconds is an eternity when you're waiting to hear whether someone will agree to accelerate your murder. All right, Leora whispered. Starting tomorrow morning, Desmond continued. 2 pills instead of 1. Crush them finer. Make sure he drinks the entire cup. What if he doesn't? Then stand there and watch until he does. Tell him you're worried about his health. Tell him the doctor recommended staying hydrated. Just make sure it gets in his system. Understood. And Leora, no more mistakes. We're too close now. The call ended. Bug 1 clicked off. I lay perfectly still, processing what I'd just heard. October 14th had been 73 days away when I found the lockbox. A comfortable timeline. Time to gather evidence, build an airtight case, dismantle their operation with surgical precision. Now, I had 22 days, and tomorrow they were doubling whatever poison they'd been giving me. 22 days, with a competent investigator and a watchmaker's toolkit. That's more than enough time to dismantle any mechanism, but only if I moved immediately. I sat up, turned on the lamp, and pulled out my phone. The text to Darren was brief. Clock ticking faster. Need private investigator assigned this week. Urgent. I hit send at 11:14 p.m. The reply came within 2 minutes. I'll get her on the line tomorrow morning. Her. So Darren already had someone in mind. Former law enforcement probably, someone who specialized in elder fraud. I set the phone down and stared into the darkness. 22 days. They were doubling the dosage starting tomorrow morning, which meant I'd need to find a way to avoid drinking coffee without making Leora suspicious. I'd need to pretend to drink while disposing of it. I'd need to act progressively more confused, more docile, more like the cognitive decline they were claiming I had. I'd need to become the victim they expected, while simultaneously building the case that would destroy them. It was 11:17 p.m. on August 6th. In approximately 8 hours, my daughter would bring me coffee laced with double the previous poison dose. In 22 days, they intended to have me declared incompetent and stripped of everything I owned. I opened my journal and wrote in watchmaker's shorthand, timeline accelerated. August 20th, new deadline. Dosage doubled. Investigator required immediately. Below it, I drew a small gear with 22 teeth, 1 for each day I had left. Then I lay back down, thinking about how a watchmaker dismantles a complicated movement when time is running out. You don't start with the most obvious components. You identify the keystone, the single gear that when removed causes the entire mechanism to collapse. I needed to find their keystone, and I had 22 days to do it. Darren made the introduction within 24 hours. The meeting was set for August 8th at a coffee shop on Burlington's outskirts, the kind of place where no one from Leora's real estate circles would ever venture. The investigator's finger froze on the photograph of Dr. Finch's signature. I've seen this exact forgery style before. Adrienne Callahan was 52, with steel gray hair cut short and eyes that had spent 20 years with the FBI learning to spot patterns invisible to civilians. She'd retired 3 years ago and opened a private practice specializing in elder fraud cases the Bureau deemed too small to prioritize. But that destroyed families just the same. I'd spread the guardianship file photographs across the corner booth table under dim lighting, 23 images documenting the complete conspiracy. She'd listened to my account without interruption for 15 minutes, then reached for the medical assessment bearing Dr. Harvey Finch's signature. Her finger stopped on the handwriting. This signature, she said, her voice quiet but certain. I've seen this exact forgery style before. This isn't his first time doing this. My stomach dropped. How many times? Enough for me to spot it instantly. The capital F, the way the tail on the H curves. There's a forger I tracked for 2 years in Florida who used this exact pattern. We called him the caretaker because he always posed as a concerned family member or romantic partner. 11 confirmed cases across 4 states before he vanished in 2019. 11, I repeated, that we knew about. Financial fraud has a 95% non-reporting rate among elderly victims. Shame, embarrassment, family pressure. She looked up from the photograph. You're the first one I've encountered who fought back this methodically. I had 40 years of training in precision observation. Lucky for you. She gathered the photographs into a neat stack. What else do you have? I pulled out the second file, the one Lorraine Archer had delivered to my bedroom that morning while Leora was at work. 43 surveillance photographs taken from Lorraine's bedroom window during her insomniac nights over the past 3 weeks. A dark blue sedan with Connecticut plates parked on the street every Thursday at 11 p.m. My neighbor, I explained. She doesn't sleep well, watches the street. Adrian studied the clearest shot license plate fully visible in street lamp light. "Give me 48 hours and a license plate," she said, photographing the image with her phone. "If this is who I think it is, his real name isn't what your daughter knows, and he has outstanding warrants in 3 states. Not his first time," she'd said almost to herself, and I knew right then my story did not begin with me. I was victim number 12, maybe 13. There had been others before, other lonely widowers, other daughters in debt, other carefully orchestrated traps disguised as family reunion. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Keep doing exactly what you're doing. Document everything. Stay alive." She slid a business card across the table. "This number goes directly to my cell. 24 hours. If anything escalates, you call immediately." I left the coffee shop with the first real hope I'd felt since finding that rectangle in the attic dust. The next 5 days were the longest of my life. August 8th through 13th, waiting for toxicology results, waiting for Adrienne's background check on the Connecticut plates, maintaining my performance as the confused docile father while Leora brought poisoned coffee every morning. "Here's your coffee, Dad," she'd say, standing close watching. "Made it just how you like it?" "Thank you, sweetheart," I'd reply, lifting the mug, pretending to sip while barely wetting my lips. The moment she left for work, I'd pour the entire cup into the potted houseplant in the corner of the living room, a small fern Leora had placed there months ago for decoration. By the 3rd day, the plant had begun to turn, not the slow yellowing of neglect, but something faster, the leaves losing their green from the edges inward. Whatever she was adding to my coffee, it did not belong in living things. That was enough for me to know. I stared at it for a long time that afternoon, thinking about what 3 weeks of daily doses would have done to me, what they were still planning to do if I gave them the chance. That evening, while Leora was showing a property, I drove to a garden center and purchased an identical plastic fern. I brought it home, swapped it for the dead plant, and placed the fake one in the exact same spot by the window. Leora never noticed. She walked past it every single day for the next 3 days and never once registered that the plant she'd watched me water religiously for weeks was now synthetic. I looked at that plastic plant by the window, perfectly green, completely artificial, just like my daughter's concern for my well-being. The bugs captured 3 more conversations during those 5 days. Leora and Desmond confirming the August 20th deadline was ironclad, discussing my increasing confusion with satisfaction, planning the final signatures I'd need to provide once the guardianship petition was filed. They never suspected I was listening to every word. On day 5, August 13th, I was sitting in my bedroom at 4 in the afternoon when my phone buzzed with a text from Darren. "Results are in. See me tomorrow morning. Do not drink a single drop of anything she pours." I read the message 3 times. The phrasing was deliberate. Not "avoid the coffee," not "be careful." Do not drink a single drop of anything she pours. So it wasn't just the coffee. It was everything. Water, juice, tea, anything she handed me directly. I looked up at the fake plant across the room. Its plastic leaves caught the afternoon light streaming through the window, looking absolutely real to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. Just like Leora's smile when she brought me breakfast. Just like her concern when she asked how I was feeling. Just like her voice when she called me Dad. Perfectly convincing, completely artificial. Tomorrow I would learn exactly what poison she'd been feeding me for weeks. Tomorrow I would see the toxicology report that would tell me how close I'd come to the death they'd planned. But tonight I sat in the dark bedroom and stared at that plastic plant and thought about everything else I'd failed to notice in 3 weeks of living here. What other small details had I missed? What other signs had been there that I'd overlooked? Because I was so desperate to believe my daughter still loved me. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Darren. "Tomorrow 8 a.m., bring the journal." I set the phone down and returned my gaze to the plastic fern by the window, indistinguishable from life, perfect in every detail, except that it was designed to deceive. I arrived at Darren's office at 8:50 a.m. on August 14th. He already had the toxicology report spread across his desk under harsh fluorescent lighting. The chemical name stared back at me from the lab report in the cold clinical typeface lorazepam, 4 milligrams per 100 milliliters. Lorazepam, Darren said, tapping the page. At a concentration far beyond any safe therapeutic threshold for someone your age. I sat down slowly in the leather chair across from his desk. "What does it do?" It's a benzodiazepine, prescribed for anxiety insomnia. At therapeutic doses, it's harmless. At this concentration administered daily without medical supervision. He paused. 14 consecutive days would induce profound disorientation, short-term memory loss, confusion. All the symptoms they claimed you were exhibiting in their guardianship petition. They were creating the illness they were diagnosing, I said quietly. Exactly. The perfect clinical presentation. You'd appear to have early-stage cognitive decline to any physician who examined you because you actually would be impaired from the drug. Then they file for emergency guardianship, citing those exact symptoms, and no judge would question it. I opened my leather journal to the pages I'd written during my first 2 weeks in Leora's house, before I knew to be suspicious, before I started dumping the coffee. July 17th, slightly dizzy this morning, getting old. July 19th, trouble focusing on newspaper, words blurring. July 21st, forgot what day it was, had to check calendar twice. I wrote this on day 3, I said, pointing to the July 17th entry. I thought I was just tired from the move. How many mornings had I smiled at her over coffee, thanking her for caring about her old father, while poison accumulated in my bloodstream? How many times had I attributed my dizziness to age, my confusion to stress? My memory lapses to natural decline, never suspecting my own daughter was systematically destroying my cognitive function to make her fraud look legitimate. If you'd kept drinking it, Darren said carefully, by August 20th you would have been genuinely incapacitated, disoriented enough to sign anything they put in front of you without understanding what you were signing. Or too confused to refuse, I said. The phone on Darren's desk buzzed. He pressed the speaker button. I'm here. Adrian Callahan's voice came through. You got the report. We're looking at it now, Darren said. Good. And that's not even the worst thing I dug up on our friend Desmond. I looked up sharply. What else? Come to the conference room at 2 p.m. I'll show you everything. The conference room had a projector screen covering the entire north wall. When Adrian arrived that afternoon, she connected her laptop without preamble and filled the screen with a document I recognized immediately, a case file from the FBI's financial crimes database. 11 cases, Adrian said, clicking through slides. 5 states, 12 years. This is what I've been able to confirm. There are likely more. The screen showed a timeline stretching from 2011 to 2023. 11 red dots spread across Florida, Georgia, Nevada, Oregon, and Vermont. 4 of those victims are dead, she continued. All classified as natural deaths at the time, heart failure, stroke. 1 was ruled as complications from Alzheimer's, which we now know was probably induced by the same drug they've been feeding you. 11 people, I repeated. The number felt impossible. How did he... Patterns always the same. He identifies an elderly target with liquid assets and a vulnerable family member, usually an adult child in financial distress. He builds a relationship with the family member, first poses as a financial advisor or romantic partner. Then he orchestrates the introduction to the target, sets up the living situation, begins the medication, regimen forges the medical documents, files the guardianship petition. Entire operation takes 3 to 4 months, from first contact to asset liquidation. She clicked to the next slide. A photograph of a woman mid-30s standing beside a man who looked exactly like the person I'd seen in my attic. This is Lisa Brennan, victim number 4 from Nevada, 2016. Her father died 6 weeks after she signed the guardianship papers. Massive stroke. Another click. This is Christine Valdez, victim number 7 from Oregon, 2019. Her mother is currently in a nursing home with catastrophic memory loss, can't remember her own daughter. The estate was liquidated to quote-unquote pay for care. Desmond and Christine took $400,000. 11 people, and I was supposed to become number 12. Leora isn't the mastermind, Adrian said. She's just the 4th proxy asset he's successfully groomed. The debt makes them vulnerable. He promises them a way out. They convince themselves they're not really hurting anyone, just moving assets around, just ensuring their future. Then the target gets sick or confused or dies, and by the time they realize what they've been part of, they're in too deep to back out. Hey, she's a tool, I said flatly. He found a tool in financial distress and aimed her at me. Yes. Adrian clicked to another slide. A man's face filled the screen, younger maybe 40 with intense eyes and a pressed suit. But here's the good news. There's a man actively hunting Desmond down right now. Conrad Graves' son, victim number 8 from Georgia. His father died in 2019, officially ruled as cardiac arrest, but Conrad never believed it. He's spent 4 years tracking Desmond's pattern across states, and his current lead is heading straight to Vermont. When Darren asked, "He's already here, arrived in Burlington yesterday. I've been coordinating with him for the past 48 hours. He has evidence from the Georgia case that corroborates everything we're finding. Same forgery patterns, same medication scheme, same guardianship fraud structure. Combined with what you've documented, we finally have enough to build a federal case." I stared at the projected slide showing all 11 victims, names, dates, locations, dollar amounts stolen, the Florida cases from 2011 and 2013, Georgia in 2019, Nevada in 2016, Oregon scattered between 2017 and 2021, and now Vermont 2023 with my name waiting to be added to that list. 11 people. Did they see it coming? Or did they just drink their coffee every morning, smiling at the person they raised, never imagining their own child had become their executioner? Knowing there were 11 victims before me changed everything. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for every person who'd been too broken to fight back. The next morning, Darren and I drove to Dr. Harvey Finch's private medical office with the guardianship evaluation forms. Dr. Finch took one look at the signature on the form and spoke within 3 seconds. "This isn't my signature." He was 69, with silver hair and steady hands that had practiced medicine in Burlington for 35 years. He'd been my family physician for 2 decades, had treated my pneumonia in 2015, had sat with me when Estelle was dying, and there was nothing medical science could do, had signed my last 3 annual physicals, with perfect marks for a man my age. He held the guardianship form up to the light from his desk lamp, studying the signature line. "And this isn't my signature," he repeated, his voice hardening. "I never signed this. Someone forged my name on a legal document." "Can you be certain?" Darren asked, though the answer was already clear from the physician's face. "I've signed my name approximately 40,000 times in 35 years of practice. I know my own signature." He pointed to the capital F in Finch. "I always extend the horizontal stroke exactly 3 millimeters past the vertical. This extends 5, and the H here," he traced it with his finger. "The tail curves left, mine curves right. This is a competent forgery, but it's not my handwriting." He set the form down and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen from him before, pure professional fury. "Harold, these forms claim you're suffering from early-stage cognitive decline with progressive memory impairment. They recommend immediate guardianship placement." He paused. "I examined you 6 weeks ago. You scored perfectly on cognitive function tests. Your memory is excellent. Your reasoning is sharp. You're in better mental shape than half the 50-year-olds I see." "That's what I told them," I said quietly. "Someone forged my signature to make you appear incompetent," Dr. Finch said, and his voice shook slightly, not from age, but from the violation. "They weaponized my medical license to commit fraud. Do you know what that means for my reputation? For my practice, for every legitimate evaluation I've ever signed?" "I'm sorry," I said. "Don't apologize." He pulled out a legal pad and began writing. "I'm drafting an affidavit right now, certifying that you are in pristine mental and physical health. I will testify to that under oath in any courtroom in this country. And I'm filing an emergency report with the Vermont Medical Board this afternoon about signature forgery and fraudulent medical documentation." Dr. Finch's hand trembled slightly as he signed the affidavit, not from age, but from pure righteous fury that someone had stolen his professional identity to destroy a patient he'd cared for 20 years. "How many others?" he asked, looking up from the legal pad. "How many other physician signatures has this person forged?" "We don't know yet," Darren said, "but we're investigating." That afternoon, back at Darren's office, Adrienne called with an update. "I traced the medical documentation back to its source," she said through the speakerphone. "Sunshine Mental Health Clinic in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It's a shell operation. They sell fraudulent psychiatric evaluations and cognitive assessments to anyone willing to pay. No actual examinations, just paperwork." "How long have they been operating?" I asked. 8 years that I can confirm. They've stamped fraudulent papers for at least 7 of Desmond's 11 targets, probably more. The clinic closed its physical location in 2021, but continues operating online through encrypted channels. 7 people, I said. 7 people got medical documents from this clinic claiming they were mentally incompetent. And in every case, Adrienne continued, her voice dropping. By the time the guardianship petition reached a judge, the target was genuinely impaired, confused, disoriented, unable to contest the claims. The lorazepam, Darren said. Exactly. They forged the medical evaluation first, that's the paper trail, the legal foundation. Then they administer the drug to create the symptoms the fake evaluation claimed already existed. By the time there's a court hearing, the victim can't effectively testify because they've been systematically poisoned into the exact mental state the forged documents described. Too mentally broken to testify. Adrienne whispered the words, and suddenly the lorazepam dosage made perfect, horrifying sense. They weren't just stealing assets. They were destroying minds to cover their tracks. It's a closed loop, I said quietly. The fake evaluation predicts cognitive decline. The drugs induce cognitive decline. The judge sees a patient who matches the medical assessment perfectly and grants guardianship. No one questions it because the victim is sitting right there looking confused and disoriented exactly as predicted. And the victim can't explain they've been drugged, Darren added, because the drug has destroyed their ability to form coherent arguments. That's why he increases the dosage in the final weeks, Adrienne said. Maximum impairment right before the critical legal proceedings. The target shows up to court unable to answer basic questions, unable to remember their own address. It validates everything the fake medical evaluation claimed. I thought about my journal entries from the first 2 weeks. Slightly dizzy, trouble focusing. Forgot what day it was. That was 14 days at normal dosage. What would 21 days at double dosage have done? What would I have looked like in a courtroom on August 20th after 3 weeks of systematic poisoning? Would I have been able to tell the judge I was being drugged, or would I have just sat there confused and disoriented, confirming every fraudulent claim they'd made about my mental decline? The targets are always too mentally broken to testify by the time it reaches a judge, Adrienne said softly. The room grew so quiet I could hear the air conditioning unit cycling on in the hallway outside Darren's office. We all sat there understanding exactly what that meant. Desmond wasn't just stealing money. He was destroying human minds as evidence concealment. 11 times he'd done this. 11 people had sat in courtrooms unable to defend themselves because the poison in their bloodstream had made defense impossible. And I'd been drinking that coffee for 14 days straight. 14 days that would have become 21 if I hadn't noticed the attic rectangle, if I hadn't built the surveillance bugs, if I hadn't extracted that sample. 14 days from complete mental destruction. I looked down at my hands, steady, precise, the same hands that had built microscopic mechanisms for 50 years. Still capable, still functional. But if I'd kept drinking that coffee for 1 more week, would they still be? I'd been 14 days from complete mental destruction. That knowledge changed how I looked at everything, including the neighbor who'd been watching my house from the beginning. On August 17th, I found Lorraine in her back garden, trimming overgrown roses with dull shears. She saw me approaching and set them down carefully. Lorraine set down her gardening shears and spoke the words that changed everything. He tried this with me, first 6 months ago. I stopped walking. What? 6 months ago, a man knocked on my door, said he was a freelance financial consultant, could help me manage my late husband's retirement accounts, maximize returns, that sort of pitch. She wiped dirt from her hands onto her gardening apron. Something about him felt wrong, not anything specific, just wrong. So I told him to leave. It's Desmond, I said. I didn't know his name then. He left a business card, but I threw it away. She looked toward Leora's house, my temporary prison next door. The very next week your daughter moved in. I never connected them until you told me about the sedan. The timeline assembled itself in my mind with horrible clarity. February 2023. Desmond approaches Lorraine's house. She rejects him. 1 week later, Leora purchases the Shelburne property and moves in. 5 months after that. July 2023, she calls me with the invitation to come stay with her. He scouted the entire block, I said quietly. You weren't available, so he pivoted to the next target. Through your daughter? Lorraine finished. I'm so sorry, Harold. If I'd known... You had no way of knowing, neither did I. She disappeared into her house and returned carrying her phone. I couldn't sleep much after Richard died, still can't most nights, so I sit by the window and watch the street. She opened her photo gallery. I started taking pictures when I saw the same car showing up every Thursday at the same time. Thought maybe it was suspicious. Thought maybe I should document it. 43 photographs, all time-stamped. Dark blue sedan with Connecticut plates parked on the street, taken from her bedroom window over the past 3 months. Every Thursday night at 11 p.m. Desmond had targeted her house before he ever approached my daughter. He had scouted the entire block patient as a spider, identifying the most vulnerable resident. When Lorraine rejected him, he didn't give up. He recruited an insider who lived right next door. I forwarded the photographs to Adrienne. Her response came within 2 minutes. He's more professional than I estimated. We need to loop in the Bureau. The FBI? This had escalated beyond private investigation into federal criminal conspiracy. I thanked Lorraine and walked back to Leora's house, the house that had been chosen specifically because it sat next to Desmond's failed first attempt. Everything had been calculated. Everything had been planned. 2 nights later, on August 19th at 10 p.m., I lay in my bedroom with the earpiece synced to bug number 1. The living room sensor activated. Leora's footsteps, the couch, her phone dialing. Desmond answered immediately. Status. Desmond, I don't know about this anymore. Her voice was shaking genuinely, shaking not the calculated tremor she used when talking to me. The way he looked at me this morning, it felt like what? Like he knew, like he could see right through me. Does he have evidence? I don't know. I don't think so. But something's changed. He's different. Different how? Quieter. Watching me more carefully. This morning, he poured his coffee down the sink when I left the room. I came back and the mug was empty in the dishwasher. Silence on the line, then Desmond's voice, colder than I'd ever heard it. You are $420,000 in the hole, Leora. Do you want to lose the house? 12 seconds of silence followed. I counted them. 12 seconds where my daughter wrestled with whatever remained of her conscience. When did I become the kind of father who doubted whether his daughter had ever truly loved him? No, she whispered finally. Keep going. Then stop questioning. We have 6 days until the deadline. If he suspects something, we accelerate. I can have new documents filed by tomorrow morning, claiming emergency psychiatric intervention is required. What if? There is no what if. You committed to this when you took the first payment 18 months ago. You're in this until it's finished. Do you understand? Another pause, shorter this time. Yes. The call ended. Bug 1 clicked off. I removed the earpiece slowly and sat on the edge of my bed in the darkness. For weeks I'd been calculating moves, building evidence, documenting conversations. My mind had been running tactical scenarios constantly, how to trap them, how to expose them, how to dismantle their conspiracy with surgical precision. But sitting there, listening to my daughter agree to continue poisoning me, all I could think about was the 10-year-old girl I'd raised entirely alone after Estelle died. I opened my phone's photo gallery, her graduation day standing next to me in a cap and gown, laughing at something the photographer had said. She'd been so proud that day. I'd been proud of her. When had that girl become this woman who called Desmond at 10 p.m. to discuss how to accelerate my mental destruction? I scrolled back further. Her 16th birthday, her first car, the workshop teaching her how to polish brass gears when she was 12, her small hands learning the same precision I'd spent 50 years perfecting. Her 10th birthday at the lake house, helping me repair Estelle's pocket watch, because she wanted to fix something her mother had loved. I sat in the dark for an hour, phone screen glowing with her graduation photo. Then I opened the old gallery again, her 10th birthday, the workshop teaching her how to polish brass gears. Small hands that had learned precision from mine. A girl who'd wanted to fix her mother's watch. I didn't know when I had lost her, or if I had ever truly had her at all. The phone buzzed with a text from Darren. Call me first thing tomorrow. Banking issue, urgent. I set the phone down and lay back in the darkness, thinking about the 10-year-old who'd polished gears beside me and the 36-year-old who was currently planning my destruction 6 rooms away. Somewhere between those two versions of my daughter, I'd lost something I didn't know how to repair. I called Darren at 6 a.m. He was already awake. The phone call from the bank came at 8:47 a.m. A power of attorney had been filed in my name, and it would activate in exactly 48 hours. I was standing in Darren's office when his desk phone rang. He listened for 30 seconds, his face going pale, then motioned for me to sit down. This is Renee Norris from Vermont Community Bank. The woman's voice came through the speakerphone, 48 years old according to Darren's quick note on his legal pad. Senior teller, 15 years detecting fraud. Mr. Whitfield, I've flagged an anomalous power of attorney filing for Harold Ramsey. It activates in 48 hours and grants full asset access to a third party. Who's the designated agent? Darren asked. Desmond Ashford. The supporting documentation includes medical assessments from Dr. Harvey Finch, diagnosing severe cognitive decline. Those assessments are fraudulent, Darren said flatly. Dr. Finch has already filed an affidavit certifying they're forgeries. I suspected as much. That's why I called. But the POA was filed correctly through the proper channels. Unless you obtain a court order blocking it, the authorization becomes legally binding at 8:47 a.m. on August 23rd. 48 hours. I looked at the office wall clock. The second hand swept smoothly around the dial, each rotation bringing me 60 seconds closer to total financial annihilation. What assets does this POA access? I asked. Everything. Primary residence liquidation authority, full bank account, access investment portfolio control. If it activates, Mr. Ashford can drain every account and initiate property sales within hours. My lakeside home, $650,000 in equity. My savings and investment accounts, $1.2 million in liquid assets. Everything I'd built in 50 years. Thank you for the alert, Darren said. We're filing an emergency motion immediately. He hung up and started typing before the phone hit the cradle. 48 hours, I said. Is that enough time to stop it? We have to make it enough. His fingers flew across the keyboard. Emergency motion to revoke power of attorney. I'm citing fraudulent medical documentation, forged physician signatures, and elder financial abuse. Filing it directly with the county court for expedited review. I watched the office clock lose half a second every minute the mechanism was worn, needed servicing, but the gears kept turning, counting down the hours that mattered most. That afternoon, while we waited for the court's response, Darren looked up from his computer. I need a definitive accounting of all your tangible assets, he said. Everything you own. If we're defending against this POA, I need to demonstrate to the judge exactly what's at stake. I'd been waiting for this moment since the day I decided to secure the watches. Follow me, I said. Darren's office had a reinforced private vault in the back room, the kind lawyers use for estate documents and sensitive client materials. I'd stored the watch collection there in early July before I'd even called him about moving into Leora's house. The vault door swung open. Inside, 23 black velvet display slots held my life's collection of vintage Swiss timepieces. Darren stepped inside and stopped breathing. The 1952 Patek Philippe perpetual calendar sat in the center slot, its white gold case catching the overhead light. Next to it, the 1948 Jaeger LeCoultre Reverso, the 1957 Omega Speedmaster, the 1943 Vacheron Constantin, the 1961 Rolex Submariner, 23 watches spanning 8 decades of Swiss horological mastery. Darren lifted the Patek Philippe carefully, as if handling a holy relic. This piece alone is worth $180,000, he said quietly. Harold, you set this up months before you moved in, before you ever called me that night. I'm just a man who protects what he values, I said. A habit of the trade. They don't know about this. Do they, Desmond and Leora? They have no idea this collection exists. I never mentioned it, not once. The POA filing lists my home equity and bank accounts, but this, I gestured at the velvet lined vault. This doesn't appear in any public record. It's held in an irrevocable trust with you as the sole trustee. Even if they liquidate everything else, they can't touch these. Darren returned the Patek Philippe to its slot with reverence. $400,000 in assets they don't know you have. Their entire financial calculation is wrong. A watchmaker's habit, I repeated. We protect the valuable things. We build cases around them. We keep them safe from entropy and theft. I looked down at the 23 watches resting in black velvet slots. Each one represented a decade of my craft, purchased with money earned from repairing thousands of other timepieces, collected one at a time over 40 years of patient accumulation. My wife asked me when I bought the Patek Philippe in 1998, "Are we keeping this for the children later, Harold Owen?" I didn't have an answer then. I'd mumbled something about investment and preservation, about Swiss craftsmanship, deserving protection. I know the answer now. I'd been keeping them for Leora, all 23 watches, each one carefully chosen, meticulously maintained, stored with the intention that someday I'd pass them to my daughter, and she'd understand what it meant to value things that outlasted their makers. She was supposed to inherit the 1952 Patek Philippe on her 40th birthday, the Jaeger LeCoultre on her 45th. The collection would have been hers, the ultimate legacy from a father who'd spent his life understanding that time was the only thing worth protecting. But there is no one left to tell. There is no daughter who will receive these watches with understanding and gratitude. There is only a woman who chose $420,000 in debt over her father's life, who agreed to poison me one breakfast at a time, who whispered, "Keep going," when her conscience wavered. The watches would survive. They always did. Swiss movements built to last centuries, maintained by hands that understood precision. But the legacy was gone. "We should close this up," Darren said softly. "The court will rule by tomorrow morning." I nodded and took one last look at the 23 slots before Darren sealed the vault door. 48 hours until the POA activated. The court had 24 hours to grant our emergency motion, and I had the rest of my life to understand that the watches I'd been saving for my daughter would never reach the hands I'd intended. The court ruled the next morning. I was at Darren's office when the notification arrived. The Vermont Circuit Court's ruling came at 10:23 a.m. on August 22nd. Emergency motion, granted the fraudulent power of attorney, was frozen. Darren read the order aloud from his screen. "The POA is frozen and all your accounts are on lockdown. They can't touch anything." I sat back in the chair, feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks: relief. Temporary, fragile relief. "How long does the freeze last?" "Until we get a permanent injunction, but that buys us time." He looked up. "Desmond will discover this within 48 hours. The moment he realizes the POA crashed, his timeline will shatter. He will get desperate." Desperate how? Unpredictable. People like Desmond don't respond well to disruption. "We need to search the house." "Agreed, but we need Leora completely clear of the property." "The Hartford Real Estate Conference," I said. "August 28th. She'll be gone from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Darren made a note. 6 days. How much time does Adriani need? "A full day. She needs the attic, the basement, every room. If there's physical evidence beyond what I photographed, she'll find it." I drove back through a golden Vermont afternoon. The trees were starting to turn early yellows, appearing at the edges of green leaves. August bleeding into September. 2 days later, on August 24th, Conrad Graves walked into Darren's conference room carrying a file box that looked like it weighed 30 pounds. He was 44 with the haunted eyes of someone who'd spent years hunting a ghost. He'd driven 17 hours from Georgia. "Adrienne told me about your situation," he said, shaking my hand. "It's the same pattern, exactly the same." He spread files across the table, photographs, bank records, court filings from 4 states. "Desmond's current identity is a total fabrication," Conrad said. "He changed his legal name via court order 8 years ago in Nevada. He runs a network of 4 accomplices. They move money, forge documents, set up shell companies. Since my father died," he continued, his voice cracking slightly, "they told me it was a natural cardiac arrest. He was 73, had high blood pressure. But something felt wrong. The way his girlfriend, who turned out to be one of Desmond's accomplices, disappeared the day after the funeral with $60,000 from his accounts." He pulled out a lab report. "I paid for an independent post-mortem toxicology panel 6 months after the burial. My father was systematically murdered with digoxin." The word hung in the air like smoke. "Digoxin?" Adrienne repeated barely above a whisper. Her eyes locked onto mine, both of us understanding the implication without voicing it. Conrad looked between us. "What am I missing?" "Digoxin is a cardiac medication," Adrienne said carefully. "In the wrong hands at the wrong concentration, it becomes something else entirely." "They knew exactly what they were doing when they chose it," Conrad said quietly. "The lorazepam had been to make me confused and compliant. But lorazepam doesn't kill. It impairs. It makes you easy to control. Digoxin stops your heart." "How was it administered to your father?" Adrienne asked. "Mixed into food or drink over weeks. Small doses. Cumulative." Adrienne looked at me. I looked back at her. The coffee? The juice? The tea Leora brought me every morning with that smile that looked so much like her mother's. What else was hidden in that kitchen? "We need to check Mr. Ramsey's kitchen immediately," Adrienne said sharply. "Not in 6 days. Right now." Darren was already reaching for his phone. "I'll call for emergency legal authorization." Conrad looked between all of us. "What's in the kitchen?" I stood slowly thinking about every morning for the past 6 weeks, every cup of coffee, every glass of juice, every meal prepared with such careful attention. Evidence, I said quietly. Evidence that they weren't just planning to steal from me. I looked at Conrad, a son who had spent 4 years hunting the man who murdered his father, who had driven 17 hours on the chance that his files might save a stranger's life. They were planning to kill me. We obtained legal authorization for the search within 6 hours. Darren insisted we wait until Leora was completely clear of the property, no risk of confrontation, before we had the full picture. Thursday, August 28th, the Hartford Real Estate Conference. Behind the ancient wardrobe in the attic, Adrienne found the false panel that opened into Desmond's hidden command center. I was at my lakeside house when she called at 4 in the afternoon. "We found the motherboard," Adrienne said without preamble. "Laptop forgery equipment and a target list." I stood at the window overlooking the lake. "How many targets?" "7. Harold, there's something you need to know about the woman living next door to you." My chest tightened. "Lorraine, your name is at the top. Target a highest value deadline, non-negotiable. The neighbor Lorraine Archer is listed as target B." I closed my eyes. Desmond had tried her first 6 months ago. When she rejected him, he pivoted to me. But he'd never abandoned Lorraine, he just moved her to second position, waiting until after he'd finished with me to circle back around. A leather notebook. Adrienne continued. Handwritten notes, dates, financial profiles, vulnerability assessments. "Harold, this isn't just about you and Lorraine. There are 5 more names on that list. We're looking at a serial predation operation spanning multiple states. 7 elderly people who didn't know their names sat in a notebook behind a false panel in an attic. That evening, I drove to Shelburne. Lorraine was watering her roses in the fading light, moving slowly between the bushes, with a green watering can, completely unaware that her name sat second on a killer's list. I told her everything: the investigation, the 11 previous victims, the target list. She listened without interrupting, her face growing paler with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Target B," she said finally. "I suppose I should feel honored I made the list at all. This isn't a joke, Lorraine." "I know it isn't." She looked at her hands. "I chased him off my property 6 months ago because something felt wrong. Just wrong. And now you're telling me that instinct saved my life." "For now," I said. "But once he's finished with me, you're next. Then we stop him before he finishes with you." The next morning, Darren spread printed pages across his desk, text logs extracted from Desmond's laptop. A complete digital trail of the conspiracy, going back to February 2022, 16 months before I moved into Leora's house. February 14th, 2022. Darren read aloud, "Leora to Desmond. My dad is selling the shop at the end of the year. He'll clear roughly $2 million cash. He lives completely alone." February 2022. I'd still been at the workshop, still repairing watches, still living alone in the lakeside house talking to Estelle's photograph because there was no one else. Leora had already been planning this. April 2022. Leora. Sale should close by December. I'll reach out to him next summer. July 2023. Darren looked up. "Leora to Desmond, making the call today. He's lonely enough now. Timing is perfect." The warm voice on the phone that Thursday afternoon. "Dad, come stay with me." It hadn't been spontaneous. It hadn't been a daughter suddenly concerned about her aging father. It had been the final phase of an 18-month operation, executed at the precise moment my loneliness made me most vulnerable. She hadn't made a desperate choice under financial pressure. She'd initiated contact with Desmond herself. She'd identified me as a target. She'd waited 18 months for the perfect moment. The workshop sale, the isolation, the loneliness. She'd known all of it. She'd used all of it. I sat staring at the printed logs without speaking. Then I stood slowly buttoning my coat with the same precision I'd used for 50 years when closing watch cases. "Let's call the bureau," I said quietly. "We're done playing." Darren reached for his phone. I walked to the window and looked out at Burlington's morning streets. They had been hunting me for 18 months. Now I was coming for them, and I had the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a former FBI agent, a 30-year attorney, a son from Georgia, who had spent 4 years waiting for this moment, and a complete digital record of everything they had built. 18 months they'd planned this. I had 72 hours to destroy it. September 2nd. The vial was smaller than my thumb, clear glass pharmaceutical grade with a handwritten label in neat block letters. Adrian sent me the photo at 11:43 a.m. while I stood in Leora's vegetable garden, pretending to admire her tomatoes. "Beautiful crop this year," I said. My phone was angled so she couldn't see the screen. Leora smiled, wiping soil from her hands. "Desmond built the raised beds last spring." Desmond built a lot of things in this house, including a pharmaceutical cache behind the spice rack. Adrienne's text read, "Found it. Back panel false. Lorazepam, 14 pills, no prescription. And this. Call you in 5. That you okay?" I straightened too fast. "Fine, just knees aren't what they used to be." "Come inside, I'll make coffee." "No." The word came out sharp. "Water sounds good." She headed inside. I waited until the screen door closed, then called Adrienne. "The lorazepam matches your blood work, same manufacturer. 14 pills. That's your 2-week cycle. And the other vial, that's the endgame herald." Her voice dropped. "You make someone confused and compliant first. Then you introduce something that stops the heart entirely. At your age, given the prior exposure, it would present on any standard death certificate as natural causes." I thought about the coffee I'd refused every morning for 3 weeks. How insistent Leora had been. "Don't touch anything in that kitchen," Adrienne said. "Don't let her know we found it." "She's making me water right now." "Then you're about to remember you left something in your car." I did exactly that. Drove to the bottom of the driveway and sat there shaking for 11 minutes. The thing about poison is how patient it makes them. 14 days of medication in my morning coffee, carefully measured, just enough to make me slow, forgetful, incompetent. And then when the guardianship papers were ready and the POA had been filed, something else. A dose in my evening tea, maybe. I'd have died in my sleep. Peacefully, they'd say. After such a difficult few months, what with the confusion and the paranoia. Leora would have cried at my funeral. I was certain of that. Darren called at 1:20 p.m. "Bureau wants to meet tomorrow, 9 a.m. Burlington Field Office. They're treating this as an active murder conspiracy." "What do I do tonight?" "Come stay with me. If I disappear, she'll destroy the evidence." "And Harold?" "I've been certain since I found the rectangle in the attic. I'm not stopping now." The FBI field office occupied the 3rd floor of a federal building downtown. Marcus Pembroke met us in a conference room overlooking Lake Champlain, 51 years old, graying at the temples with a wedding band. He turned slowly when thinking. 23 years with the Bureau. "Mr. Ramsey?" He shook my hand firmly. "You've built a case most victims never managed to build." He laid crime scene photos on the table, the spice rack, the carved-out drywall, the vial. "We confirmed the substance this morning, pure digoxin pharmaceutical grade. At your age and weight, given the prior exposure, a carefully measured dose would trigger cardiac arrest within hours. It would present on any standard death certificate as natural causes." "How much is in that vial?" Adrienne asked. "Enough," Pembroke said quietly. His wedding band made another rotation. More than enough. The conference room lights hummed in the silence. Darren's coffee had gone cold. "We need 72 hours, Pembroke said. "Desmond has accomplices in 5 states. We've been building parallel investigations in Florida, Arizona, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. We need to arrest them simultaneously. If we take Desmond first, the others scatter. A watch movement has 200 individual parts. Each one must move in perfect sequence or the whole mechanism fails." Pembroke was describing the same thing. "What do you need from me?" "Go home. Act normal. Don't change your routine. The evidence stays exactly where it is until our forensic team documents it Monday morning." "You want me to sleep in that house for 3 more nights?" "We'll have an agent at the end of your street the entire time. You walk out your front door and we extract you immediately." He paused. "But if you can give us 72 hours, we can end this. Not just for you, for every victim they've targeted." I thought about Conrad's father, about Lorraine, who had been next on that list. "One more thing," I said. "The birthday party, September 5th, 30 guests. If the other arrests happen simultaneously that evening, there's nowhere for Desmond to run. The party is where we close it." Pembroke turned his wedding band once. "I'll position 2 plainclothes agents as guests. You do nothing until all 4 other arrests are confirmed." He paused. "Then show them exactly what a watchmaker built while they weren't paying attention." I pulled into the driveway at 6:47 p.m. Through the kitchen window, Leora stood at the sink 20 feet from the spice rack, where the vial sat waiting in the dark. The The pumpkin soup smelled exactly the way it had when I was 43 and bedridden with pneumonia, nutmeg cream, the faint char of caramelized onions, and I couldn't lift the spoon. September 2nd, 36 hours into the 72-hour countdown. Leora had set the dining room table with the good china, the pattern with tiny blue flowers that had belonged to Estelle, 2 bowls, 2 cloth napkins. The overhead light cast everything in warm amber, the way it had on 1,000 family dinners when she was small. "I made your favorite," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "You haven't eaten in 2 days." I stared at the bowl. The soup was perfect golden smooth, with a swirl of cream forming a careful spiral on the surface. She'd even added the pepitas on top, toasted the way I'd taught her when she was 12. "I'm not hungry." "This day," I said, "I'm not hungry." I pushed the bowl toward the center of the table. It left a small trail of condensation on the wood. Leora's hands were folded in her lap. She didn't touch her own soup, just sat there watching me with eyes that hadn't slept properly in days. I could see the exhaustion in the way she held her shoulders, the tightness around her mouth. "You used to love this soup," she said finally. Her voice cracked, but her hands were steady. I thought about the lorazepam, the digoxin vial behind the spice rack 23 feet from where we sat, the handwritten label in block letters, the way Pembroke's wedding band had turned and turned when he'd said enough for 4 victims. "Things change," I said. We sat in silence for maybe 3 minutes. The only sound was the kitchen faucet dripping the rhythm I'd been meaning to fix for 2 months. Drip. 4 seconds. Drip. 4 seconds. A metronome counting down to Monday morning. When Leora finally looked up, her eyes were wet. But when she saw the untouched bowl between us, something flickered across her face that I'd seen 10,000 times in 42 years of watching tiny mechanisms reveal their secrets. Relief. Not disappointment, not hurt. Relief. She stood without a word, carried both bowls back to the kitchen, and I heard the disposal running for a long time. A watch mainspring can store energy for 48 hours, wound to maximum tension. Hold it there too long, and the metal fatigues, loses its temper, shatters when you finally release it. But release it at precisely the right moment, through exactly the right gear train, and it'll run true for decades. I'd been holding tension for 72 hours. Monday morning, the mechanism would finally move. September 5th, 7 p.m. 30 guests filled the living room, neighbors Darren and Lorraine, 3 couples from my watchmaker days, people who'd known me since before Leora was born. She'd insisted on the party. "Your 68th birthday, Dad. We should celebrate." She'd hung paper lanterns from the ceiling beams, set up a long table with hors d'oeuvres, a cake from the bakery in Burlington, with "Happy Birthday Harold" in blue script. Everyone held champagne flutes. The room hummed with conversation, the careful, pleasant noise of people who didn't know they'd walked into a crime scene. Leora stood by the fireplace in a green dress I'd never seen before, holding her wine glass with both hands. When the room quieted, she tapped a fork against the crystal. "I want to make a toast," she said. Her voice was strong, practiced. "To my father, who taught me that love means sacrifice. Everything I've done has been for you, Dad. Everything." 30 glasses lifted. 30 people smiled at me, waiting. I stood and walked to the built-in bookshelf where I'd hidden the projector controls behind a row of Estelle's art books. "Let me show everyone what sacrifice really looks like," I said. The screen descended from the ceiling mount. The room went quiet in the way rooms do when something has just shifted, but no one understands what yet. I pressed play. The first image was the audio waveform from July 12th. Leora's voice filled the room through hidden speakers. "Not ready yet, Des. He's still too sharp. We need at least 2 weeks before—" Then Desmond's reply. "The paperwork's already filed. Dr. Finch's signature, the whole package. We're committed." Someone's champagne flute hit the hardwood. The sound was very loud. The second slide was the toxicology report. Lorazepam detected 14-day exposure pattern, concentration, consistent with daily dosing. The third was the digoxin vial photograph. Pharmaceutical grade handwritten label, 8 milliliters. The fourth slide showed 11 faces. Elderly people, mostly men, all over 65. Beneath each photo, a name, a date, a location. Conrad Graves' father was third from the left. I understood then why I'd endured the 72 hours. Not for my stolen money. Not even for my own survival. For them. For the 11 who hadn't survived their Desmond Ashford, who died alone in managed care facilities while their families signed papers they didn't understand. Every hour I'd spent in that house with the digoxin vial in the kitchen had been for them. The front door opened. 4 men in tactical gear entered with the deliberate efficiency of people who'd done this exact operation in 4 other states simultaneously. The lead agent moved straight to where Desmond stood, frozen by the dessert table's champagne flute still raised. "Desmond Ashford, you're under arrest for elder fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and interstate racketeering." The handcuffs clicked shut while the projection screen still showed Conrad's father's death certificate. In Georgia, Florida, Nevada, and Oregon Pembroke had told me 4 more arrests were happening at this exact moment. 5 states, 5 arrests, 1 coordinated strike. The mechanism I'd wound for 72 hours had finally released, and every gear was turning true. The FBI agents escorted Desmond out in handcuffs while guests stood frozen, some still holding champagne flutes. Across the room, past the projection screen, still showing the 11 faces, Leora stood alone by the fireplace. She was staring directly at me, her face drained of color, the wine glass in her hand trembling so violently I could hear the liquid sloshing from 15 feet away. She opened her mouth. No sound came out. The 14-year-old sat across from me in the FBI conference room, with her hands folded on the table, like she was waiting for a piano lesson to start, and Special Agent Pembroke said, "Mr. Ramsey Vivian called our tip line 5 weeks ago." The girl had dark hair pulled into a neat ponytail and wore a sweatshirt with a high school orchestra logo. She looked at me with the kind of direct eye contact teenagers usually avoid. "I don't understand," I said. Pembroke pulled a file from the stack in front of him. "August 1st, 2:17 a.m. She heard a man on the phone outside your house talking about account transfers on October 14th. Called us from her grandmother's landline. Vivian spoke for the first time. Her voice was steady. I watch crime shows with Grandma. It sounded wrong. I stared at her. August 1st. That was the night I'd installed the second recording device in the attic 3 weeks before the digoxin was found. You were outside my house at 2 in the morning. I was at Grandma's next door. Couldn't sleep. I heard someone in your driveway talking on the phone. He didn't know I had the window open. He was saying things about guardianship papers and bank routing numbers and how the old man won't know what hit him. Pembroke tapped the file. The call launched a preliminary investigation. We'd already flagged Desmond Ashford's name in connection with a Florida case. When Vivian's tip mentioned your address, it opened a parallel file. By the time you brought us your evidence, we'd been building a case for 37 days. My hands felt cold. You mean, if Desmond had used the digoxin during those 72 hours, we had agents positioned within 4 minutes of your house. You were covered. I looked at the 14-year-old girl who'd called the FBI because something sounded wrong in the middle of the night. You saved my life. Vivian's cheeks flushed. I didn't want Grandma's neighbor to get hurt. For 72 hours, I'd believed I was alone in that house with the digoxin vial 20 feet from where I slept. I'd felt the isolation like a physical weight, me against Leora and Desmond, and the entire mechanism they had built to destroy me. But the truth was different. A 14-year-old watching crime, shows with her grandmother, FBI agents I never saw parked 4 minutes away, Pembroke coordinating 5 state operations while I ate dinner in silence and refused poisoned soup. The invisible hands that had kept me safe while I focused only on the poison behind the spice rack. I hadn't been alone at all. September 8th. Interrogation room. B had a table, 4 chairs, and a mirror that wasn't really a mirror. I stood on the observation side with Pembroke, while Leora sat across from 2 federal prosecutors in the room next door. She'd been in custody for 3 days. Her green dress from the birthday party was gone, replaced with gray sweatpants and a white t-shirt. Her hair was pulled back. She looked 20 years older than she had on September 5th. The lead prosecutor slid a legal pad across the table. We need everything. Desmond's real name, his aliases, the offshore accounts, accomplice locations, everything. Leora's hands were shaking. She picked up the pen. She wrote for 43 minutes, 3 false identities. Desmond Ashford was actually David Holm from Tallahassee, wanted in Georgia for a 2019 fraud case. 6 offshore accounts across the Caymans and Panama. Accomplice addresses in Arizona, Florida, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. The Florida Psychiatric Clinic's license number. Page after page of careful block letters, the same handwriting I'd seen on birthday cards for 43 years. Then she stopped writing and looked up at the prosecutor. "There's a woman in Concord," she said, her voice cracked. "Margaret Holloway, 227 Birch Street. He told me yesterday morning she's got maybe a week left before the digoxin dose goes terminal." The prosecutor leaned forward. "Active poisoning, right now?" He flew to New Hampshire on September 3rd, said the guardianship would finalize by Friday, and the cardiac arrest would look natural by Monday. Pembroke was already on his phone, talking to someone in rapid-fire instructions. Concord Field Office, immediate extraction, medical team standing by. The prosecutor's expression didn't change. "Why are you telling us this now?" Leora looked directly at the mirror. She couldn't see me, but it felt like she could. "Because my father is still alive, and she deserves to be too." Pembroke ended his call. "Agents are en route. ETA 12 minutes. I stood there watching my daughter through the one-way glass, and I didn't know who she was anymore. The woman who'd measured lorazepam into my coffee for 14 days. The girl who'd made pumpkin soup when I had pneumonia. Both. Neither. Someone I'd never really known at all. "Can I speak to her?" I asked. Pembroke shook his head. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. That's her choice." November in Vermont feels like the world turning gray. The courthouse steps were cold enough that I could see my breath, and the maples lining the street had already dropped their leaves. Federal Judge Ellis, 62, sharp-voiced, 30 years on the bench, had delivered sentencing at 10:45 a.m. Desmond Ashford, 18 years, federal custody for elder fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, interstate racketeering. 4 accomplices' sentences ranging from 5 to 12 years. The Florida Psychiatric Clinic lost its medical license permanently. Leora 3 years supervised probation with mandatory psychiatric rehabilitation. The prosecutor had argued for 5 years minimum, but Leora's confession had saved Margaret Holloway, and 74-year-old Margaret was alive because Leora had spoken up when she didn't have to. Judge Ellis said the state believed in rehabilitation for those who chose to stop the cycle of harm. At what point does a daughter stop being your daughter and become just another defendant? Or does that blood thread survive everything, even attempted patricide, even standing in a federal courtroom, watching her sentenced, even the memory of her relief when you refused the poisoned soup? I didn't know the answer. Darren stood beside me on the courthouse steps, watching the state van carry Leora toward 3 years of psychiatric treatment. "It's over, Harold," he said. The watch collection was safe. The house was mine. 12 elders would never face their Desmond Ashford because the network was dismantled. Margaret Holloway was alive in Concord, recovering. "Are you all right?" Darren asked. I watched the van turn the corner and disappear. I'd imagined this moment for months, the satisfaction, the vindication, the sense of gears finally clicking into place after everything had been broken. But standing there in the November cold, all I felt was silence. The mechanism had run its course. Every gear had turned exactly as it should. Justice had been served. I hadn't prepared for the silence after the gears stopped turning. The key stuck in the lock the way it always did, brass corroded from lake humidity, and I had to jiggle it twice before the tumbler caught, and the front door of my lakeside house swung open after 5 months of abandonment. The air inside smelled like closed windows in November cold. Dust coated every surface thick enough to show fingerprints. The mail lay in a pile beneath the slot, where the post office had shoved it through utility bills, grocery circulars, a catalog for watch repair supplies I'd never ordered from again. I set my single suitcase down in the entryway and stood there listening to the silence. The lake was gray through the living room windows. No boats this late in the season, just water and sky meeting in a line so faint I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I opened the windows one by one, despite the cold. The house needed air. It needed the sound of something besides my own breathing. The wind off the lake carried the smell of snow, coming that particular mineral scent that meant the first real storm would hit by week's end. The bedroom looked smaller than I remembered. The quilt Estelle had made was still folded at the foot of the bed, blue and white squares in the wedding ring pattern. I'd left it there in July when Leora called with the invitation that had seemed like salvation. "Come live with us, Dad. We've got so much room." I unpacked the suitcase in 10 minutes. Hung 4 shirts in the closet, put my toiletries in the bathroom, found Estelle's portrait wrapped in bubble wrap. At the bottom of the suitcase, the one I'd grabbed from the Shelburne house the day after the trial. the only thing I'd wanted to take from those rooms. I hung it above the mantel where it had always belonged. "I'm home, Estelle," I said to the photograph. She smiled back at me, the way she had for 41 years, the way she'd smiled 2 weeks before the aneurysm. Patient, knowing. Like, she could see something I couldn't yet, but would eventually understand. I'd come back to the lake house seeking peace, a refuge from the Shelburne house where I couldn't stand to sleep anymore, where every room held the memory of measuring out my own death in coffee cups and soup bowls. But standing in the living room, with the gray lake beyond the windows and Estelle watching from above the mantel, I realized what I'd found instead. Echoes. The ghost of the family life that ended when Leora chose Desmond over her father. Over truth. Over everything we'd built in 68 years. This house was supposed to be home. It just felt empty. A watch case can be pristine, crystal clear, case backle, polished crown threads, perfect, but without a movement installed, it's just metal and glass, hollow, all the structure intact, but no heartbeat ticking inside, no gears catching and releasing, in the rhythm that turns time into something you can hold. The lakeside house was like that. Every piece in place, just no precision left to measure. Early December, the writing desk in the parlor had belonged to Estelle's grandmother, Walnut, with brass fittings and a leather writing surface worn soft from a century of correspondence. I sat there for over an hour with a fountain pen and parchment stationery staring at the blank page. I wrote, "My dear Leora." The pen hovered, the ink dried on the nib. Outside the lake was frozen at the edges, ice creeping toward the center in crystalline fingers. "What do you say to a daughter who tried to kill you? Dear Leora, the weather is gray. I hope your psychiatric rehabilitation is going well. By the way, do you remember measuring lorazepam into my morning coffee, or has the state-mandated therapy helped you forget? Elibotik sporoarstpas yareshistain." I tore the page, started again. "My dear Leora." Same result. Pen hovering, mind blank. The vocabulary didn't exist. There was no watchmaker's manual for repairing a relationship, where trust was poisoned alongside the coffee, where love and attempted murder occupied the same sentence, where your daughter's relief that you refused the soup was the closest thing to mercy you'd seen in months. I folded the blank parchment and slid it into the desk drawer. The drawer wouldn't close, completely too full of old tax returns and instruction manuals. The white corner of the blank page stuck out visible, a flag of surrender or intention, I couldn't tell which. "Not today," I whispered to the empty room. "Maybe tomorrow." Mid-December. The knock at the door came at 2 in the afternoon, when the light was already starting to fade. I wasn't expecting anyone. Darren called once a week, but never visited. The neighbors were summer people gone until May. Yes, Lorraine Archer stood on the porch holding a thermos and a tin of cookies, her breath visible in the cold. She was 73, silver hair, cut short, wearing a wool coat I'd seen her wear to church 5 years ago. "I drove 2 hours to check on you," she said. "Vivian said you looked sad at Thanksgiving." I hadn't realized Vivian had been paying that much attention. "You didn't have to drive all this way." "Yes, I did. You saved my granddaughter from watching another elder die. Least I can do is bring Earl Grey." We sat in the living room, with the fire going, and the tea steaming in Estelle's good china. Lorraine didn't ask how I was doing, didn't offer platitudes about time-healing wounds. She just sat in the armchair across from me and said, "I've been sleeping through the night, 5 years of insomnia gone. Turns out when you stop pretending the pain isn't there, it stops keeping you awake." "Your husband," I said, remembering, "he died the year after Estelle. Heart attack at 68. I spent 5 years telling everyone I was fine. Wasn't fine. Couldn't sleep more than 3 hours straight. Then Vivian called the FBI tip line, and I realized she'd been watching me pretend for years. Decided to stop lying, started sleeping." She poured more tea. The fire crackled. The lake was dark beyond the windows, the ice thickening. "And strange how that works," I said. "If friends found at strange crossroads are needed most," Lorraine said. "That's what my grandmother used to say. I didn't understand it until this year. After she left, I stood at the window, watching her taillights disappear down the lake road. I thought about what she'd said, that stopping the pretense let her sleep. The blank parchment was still in my desk drawer, the corner sticking out like a white flag. Maybe I didn't need to find the perfect words for Leora. Maybe I just needed to stop pretending I wasn't still her father. The phone rang at 11:47 on a Thursday night in late December, and when I answered, Conrad Graves said, "Mr. Ramsey, they changed my father's death certificate to murder. I was sitting in the armchair by the cold fireplace with a book I hadn't been reading. The lake beyond the windows was black, no moon. Conrad, Georgia Bureau of Investigation finished their review yesterday. The state medical examiner updated the official record. Cause of death, digoxin poisoning homicide. Date of death, March 7th, 2019. They're reopening 4 other cases in Jacksonville with the same pattern. His voice was steady, but I could hear what lived underneath it. 4 years he'd believed his father had simply had a weak heart. 4 years of thinking it was just bad timing, bad luck, the kind of thing that happens to 71-year-old men. "I'm sorry it took this long," I said. "Don't be." He paused. I heard traffic in the background, the sound of Georgia at midnight. 4 years I thought my father just had a weak heart. Now it says murder, because of what you did, Mr. Ramsey. Because you built a case instead of dying quietly. The desk drawer was visible from where I sat. The white corner of parchment still stuck out the letter I couldn't finish. I'd looked at it every day for a week. "Your father's name is on the record now," I said. "That matters." "Yes, sir, it does." Another pause, longer this time. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Then can you forgive her?" "Your daughter." I looked at the desk drawer, at the white corner that had been sticking out since early December, the flag I couldn't lower or raise. Outside, the lake was so dark it looked like absence rather than water. "I don't know yet," I said, "but the anger's gone. Maybe that's the first gear." "First gear," Conrad repeated. "That's a watchmaker thing, isn't it? Everything moves in sequence. You can't force it." "No, sir, I suppose you can't." We talked for another 10 minutes about the other cases being reviewed, about Margaret Holloway in Concord, who was recovering and had sent Conrad a Christmas card, about the small mechanisms of justice that turn slower than anyone wants but sometimes turn true. After I hung up, I sat in the dark living room for a long time, thinking about what I'd said. The anger's gone. I hadn't noticed it leaving. Somewhere between the trial and the empty lakeside house, between the letter I couldn't write and Lorraine's visit with Earl Grey, the rage that had sustained me through 72 hours of living with poison had simply dissolved. Forgiveness isn't like winding a watch. You don't just turn the crown and trust the mainspring to store the energy. It's more like building a complication, a perpetual calendar maybe, or a minute repeater. You can't force the gears into alignment, can't rush the jeweling. You can only prepare each component with precision and trust that when the moment comes, the mechanism will engage on its own. Push too hard and something breaks. Wait too long and the parts corrode. The timing has to be exact, but you can't control when exact arrives. All you can do is prepare and wait and recognize the moment when the first gear finally catches. December 28th. I'd strung Christmas lights across the living room windows facing the lake. Not because I felt festive, but because Estelle had always done it, and the ritual felt like something to hold on to. They blinked red and green against the frozen water, reflecting back at me in patterns that looked almost intentional. The phone rang at 7:32 p.m. I knew before I answered, knew from the way my chest tightened, from the way my hand hesitated over the receiver. "See, Dad?" Her voice was small, fragile in a way I'd never heard from her, not even when Estelle died. "It's me. I know what you did for me at the end. The testimony. Her voice broke. 15 seconds of silence followed, both of us breathing, but neither speaking. I could hear something in the background on her end, a television maybe, or voices in a common room, the rehabilitation facility she'd been assigned to, 3 years of psychiatric treatment instead of federal prison. The testimony. I'd told Judge Ellis that Leora had saved Margaret Holloway's life when she didn't have to, that she'd provided evidence that dismantled a network spanning 5 states, that mercy and justice didn't have to be opposites. Those 15 seconds held more truth than any words could carry. Father and daughter breathing together across the distance without pretense or explanation. Just the acknowledgement that we were both still alive, both still trying, both broken in ways that might never fully heal but hadn't killed us yet. "I'm writing to you, Leora," I said finally. "It's not finished yet, but I'm writing." A sound like a sob caught in her throat. "Okay, that's enough for now." "Okay. I have to go. They have rules about phone time." "I know." "Dad," her voice was barely a whisper. "Thank you for not letting me die in there." She hung up before I could answer. I sat with the phone in my hand for maybe 5 minutes, watching the Christmas lights blink across the frozen lake. Then I stood, walked to the desk, and pulled out the blank parchment with its single line. "My dear Leora," I wrote for 40 minutes. Not about forgiveness because I didn't have that yet. Not about understanding because some things can't be understood. I wrote about the blank parchment that had been sticking out of the drawer for weeks. About Lorraine driving 2 hours with Earl Grey. About Conrad's father finally being counted. About the anger that had left without permission. About the watch collection still safe in the trust. About the lake freezing at the edges, ice creeping toward the center. About how I was still her father, even though I didn't know what that meant anymore. 3 pages front and back, every word chosen with a watchmaker's care. I folded the letter and slid it into the desk drawer. This time, it closed all the way. No white corner sticking out like surrender, no gap showing incompletion. The latch clicked with the same satisfying precision as a movement plate seating into its case. I sat there in the dark living room with the Christmas lights blinking red and green across the lake water outside, and I thought, maybe that's what resolution looks like. Not perfect, but closed. The iron safe in my study required 3 separate keys and a 4-digit combination I'd memorized 50 years ago. And on the morning of December the 29th, I opened it for the first time since July. The tumblers clicked in sequence 4, 7, 2, 9, and the door swung open with the weight of serious engineering. Inside 5 velvet-lined trays held 23 timepieces arranged in chronological order of manufacture. The oldest dated to 1891, the newest to 2015. Together, they represented 42 years of patient acquisition, every piece chosen for historical significance or mechanical excellence or both. I carried the first tray to my workbench by the window, overlooking the frozen lake. The morning light was thin and gray, the kind that makes everything look like a photograph from another era. The Patek Philippe perpetual calendar came first. Geneva, 1952. Platinum case moon phase complication value somewhere north of $180,000. I polished the crystal with a microfiber cloth, checked the crown, held it to my ear to confirm the beat rate. Perfect. Still keeping time 71 years after some watchmaker in Switzerland had assembled it with the same careful attention I'd given to 10,000 repairs. "You were supposed to go to Leora," I said to the empty study. "Now, I don't know who gets you. The Jaeger LeCoultre Reverso next. Art Deco. Elegance flip case designed for polo players in the 1930s. Then the Omega Speedmaster that had gone to the moon, or at least belonged to the same reference family. The Vacheron Constantin. The Audemars Piguet, the Breguet with the hand guilloche dial. I worked through all 5 trays methodically, the way I'd done twice a year since Estelle died, polishing crystals, checking movements, winding mainsprings, speaking to them like they could hear me, like they were old friends who understood that watches and people both need regular maintenance to stay accurate. The bottom tray held 6 pieces, 5 vintage Swiss movements in cases ranging from elegant to utilitarian. And at the end, wrapped in a square of chamois leather, gone soft with age, the pocket watch I never touched. I lifted it the way I'd lifted the Patek Philippe, same careful precision, same respect for the mechanism inside, but my hands were shaking in a way they hadn't shaken for any of the others. 15 years I'd been polishing these watches like talismans against loss, as if keeping the mechanisms perfect could somehow keep Estelle alive in the careful rhythm of their ticking. As if precision could substitute for the warmth that left the house when she died. Every 6 months I'd open the safe, lay out the trays, spend a Saturday morning maintaining the collection. And every time I'd wrap the pocket watch back in its chamois without looking at it because looking hurt too much. But this morning, after finishing the letter to Leora, after closing the desk drawer that had refused to close for weeks, I unwrapped it. The case was gold-plated brass, not solid gold. The movement was pin lever, not jeweled. Made in China sometime in the 1970s, the kind of watch you could buy at a department store for $12. The crystal was scratched. The minute hand had a tiny bend at the tip. The second hand didn't sweep it, ticked in discrete jumps, mechanical, but crude. Estelle had given it to me on our wedding day. August 1978. She was 22, I was 23. We got married in a chapel in Burlington with 17 people present and honeymooned at a bed and breakfast on the lake because we couldn't afford anything else. "You're a watchmaker," she'd said, handing me the small wrapped box at the reception. "You need a watch of your own." I'd laughed, told her I had access to 100 watches at the repair shop, but she'd shaken her head with that expression that meant she'd thought about this carefully and I should pay attention. "Not someone else's watch that you're fixing," she'd said. "Your watch. So you remember that time belongs to you too." I turned it over now, 45 years later, and read the inscription she'd had engraved on the case back. For a man who knows the value of time. The thing about a $12 pocket watch is that it isn't worth anything except everything. The Patek Philippe could buy a car. The Jaeger-LeCoultre could fund a year of retirement. But the scratched gold-plated watch with the bent minute hand was worth more than all 22 Swiss masterpieces combined. Not because of what it measured, but because of who gave it to me. Because Estelle saw a young watchmaker and understood that I didn't just repair time, I revered it. "You saw me," I whispered, and my voice cracked. "You always saw me." The tears came then. Not the quiet grief I'd carried for 15 years, like a watch that keeps running even after you forget to wind it. Real tears, the kind that double you over, the kind I hadn't cried through Leora's betrayal, or the poisoning, or the trial, or the letter I couldn't write. I slid down to the study floor with my back against the workbench, holding the $12 watch in both hands, and I wept for my wife who'd died too young, who'd seen exactly who I was on our wedding day and loved me anyway, who'd given me a cheap watch with an inscription that took me 45 years to fully understand. "I protected these watches like they were you," I said through the tears. "Like, if I kept them perfect, you'd still be here. Like, precision could bring you back." But Estelle wasn't in the watches. She was in the inscription. In the knowledge that time belonged to me too, not just to the customers whose movements I repaired. In the understanding that value isn't measured in jewels or complications or auction prices. "I never figured out how to repair what snapped when she died until now," I said to the empty study. "This whole year I've been learning how broken things get fixed, not with tools, not with precision, with time, with survival, with still being here when someone tries to take it all away." I sat on the study floor with the $12 watch in my palm, tears falling onto the scratched crystal, and for the first time since Estelle died, I understood what all these watches had been protecting me from the knowledge that I was still alive, and she wasn't that time kept moving forward even when you wanted it to stop. Leora had tried to poison me, but in surviving her I'd finally learned what my wife's inscription meant. I knew the value of time now, not because I could measure it, but because I'd almost run out of it. Lorraine knocked on my door at 2 in the afternoon on December 29th with her winter coat already buttoned and said, "Walk with me, I can't stand being inside today." I'd been sitting at my workbench since morning, with Estelle's watch still in my hand, the tears finally dry. I put on my coat. The Lake Champlain shoreline path was snow-covered, but passable, the kind of December afternoon where the cold clarifies everything. The lake was frozen solid 50 feet out, then dark water beyond that, stretching toward New York. Our breath hung visible in the air. We walked without talking for maybe 10 minutes, just the sound of snow crunching under boots and the wind coming off the lake. "Vivian told me you were crying this morning," Lorraine said finally. She was worried. "How did she—" "Kitchen window. She was helping her grandmother with something and saw you through yours. Said you were on the floor. I thought about 14-year-old Vivian Donovan watching out for me, the way she'd watched out for me at 2 in the morning in August, calling the FBI because something sounded wrong, checking through windows because an old man was crying." "I'm okay," I said. "I know, that's not why we're walking." Lorraine stopped at a bench overlooking the frozen lake. We sat. The wood was cold even through my coat. "I was so afraid of being alone, I almost let loneliness kill me," I said. The words came out before I'd planned them. That's what Leora was. Permission to not be alone. Even if she was poisoning me, at least I wasn't eating dinner by myself anymore. At least there were footsteps in the hallway in the morning. At least the Shelburne house had voices in it. "Empty rooms are worse than poison sometimes," Lorraine said quietly. "Estelle died, and I spent 5 years learning how to be alone in the lake house. Then Leora called and said, 'Come live with us.' And I thought maybe I didn't have to be alone anymore. I knew something was wrong within 2 weeks, found evidence within 4, but I stayed, because going back to the empty lake house felt like dying anyway, just slower." The wind off the lake cut through my coat. Lorraine's hands were folded in her lap, gloved fingers laced together. "I stayed awake for 5 years, because sleeping meant admitting Richard was gone," she said. 3 hours a night, maybe 4. I'd watch infomercials until dawn, because the television voices made the house feel less empty. Sometimes choosing death is quieter than choosing to keep living. Sometimes you're so tired of fighting that poison starts to look like peace. "How did you stop?" I asked. "I watched you fight. She looked at me directly. "You documented everything, built a case, wore a wire, lived in that house for 72 hours knowing the digoxin was behind the spice rack. And I thought, if a man at 68 can survive his daughter's murder attempt, I can survive bedtime." We sat on the bench watching the frozen lake for a long time. The light was already starting to fade. Winter days in Vermont don't give you much time. Loneliness works like a broken mainspring. It doesn't snap loudly, doesn't announce its failure. It just slowly loses tension until one morning you realize the clock stopped days ago and you didn't notice because you'd forgotten what ticking sounded like. You forget that time is supposed to move, that days are supposed to feel different from each other, that being alive is supposed to hurt sometimes and feel good sometimes and matter. I'd let my mainspring break when Estelle died, and then I'd invited someone into my house who tried to stop the mechanism completely. December 31st, 11:47 p.m. I sat alone in my living room on New Year's Eve with the $12 pocket watch open on my lap. The Christmas lights were still strung across the windows, blinking red and green against the frozen lake. No television, no music, just the sound of the second hand ticking with the steady rhythm that cheap Chinese movements make, not the smooth sweep of Swiss precision, but the discrete mechanical jumps that count time in pieces you can hear. Tick, tick, tick. 45 years, Estelle had been gone for 15. I'd owned the watch for 45. Leora had tried to kill me 6 months ago. I'd lived through 72 hours with digoxin behind the spice rack. I'd watched my daughter arrested. I'd testified in federal court. I'd written a 3-page letter I still hadn't mailed. I'd cried on my study floor for the first time since the funeral. And through all of it, the $12 watch had kept ticking. Estelle's inscription wasn't about measuring time precisely, I said to the empty room. It was about understanding that every second you're still alive is the most valuable thing you own. More valuable than the Patek Philippe. More valuable than the estate or the trust or the Shelburne house I'd never live in again. More valuable than precision or legacy or justice. Every second I drew breath was worth more than everything I'd spent 42 years accumulating. The second hand swept toward midnight. 11:58, 11:59. I watched it with the same attention I'd given to 10,000 repairs, checking for accuracy, verifying the mechanism, confirming that what should work actually worked. 11:59 and 45 seconds. The watch had survived 45 years of daily winding, 15 years of being wrapped in chamois and hidden at the bottom of a velvet tray, because looking at it hurt too much one morning of being held while I wept on the study floor. 11:59 and 58 seconds. I'd survived 68 years of living 15 years of grief, 6 months of systematic poisoning, 72 hours, with murder weapon in my kitchen, 1 federal trial, and the knowledge that my daughter had measured lorazepam into my coffee for 14 days. Midnight. The second hand clicked over perfectly. The minute hand jumped. The hour hand aligned. 12:00. January 1st a year I almost didn't survive to see. I gave the nod. Small, precise. The gesture I'd made 10,000 times in my workshop when a repair was finished and verified, when the balance wheel was true and the escapement was correct and the mechanism would endure. The nod that meant this works. This will keep time. This will survive. The $12 watch sat in my palm ticking perfectly, and I looked out at the frozen lake reflecting moonlight and thought, the most valuable clock is the one still ticking after everything. And to you listening to my story, remember this. Don't make my mistake. I was so terrified of being alone after Estelle died that I ignored every warning sign, the clean rectangle in the attic, the metallic taste in my coffee, the relief in Leora's eyes when I refused that soup. I saw them all, but I chose to believe the lie because empty rooms felt worse than poison. Trust your instincts. They're trying to save you. What I learned is this: when someone you love tries to destroy you, the revenge isn't about making them suffer. It's about choosing to survive. That's what Dad's calm revenge really means. Not rage, not retaliation. Just the quiet decision to keep breathing, to document the truth, to protect yourself without losing your humanity. I believe God put me through this to teach me that family isn't always blood, and that the most valuable thing you can measure isn't time, it's the fact that you're still here to measure it. Survival is victory. If this story resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a comment below. Tell me what you think about how this dad handled his family's betrayal. Would you have done anything differently? Please share this with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more stories about Dad's calm revenge, subscribe to this channel. Your support means everything. Thank you for staying until the very end. This story includes some fictionalized elements, but the lessons about trust survival and choosing life over loneliness, those are real. Take care of yourself.